אוויר הרים צלול כיין, וריח אורני, נישא ברוח הארבעים, עם כל פעמונים. ובתרדמת אילן ואבן, שבויה בחלומה, העיר אשר בדד יושבת, ובליבה חומה. ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור. ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור. איך יבשו בורות המים, כיכר השוק ריקה, ואין פוקדת הר הבית בעיר העתיקה. ובמערות אשר בסלע, והלילות רוחות, ואין יורד אל ים המלח בדרך יריחו. ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור. ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור. אך בבואי היום לשיר לך, ולך לקשור כתרים, קטונתי מצעיר בנייך, ומאחרון המשוררים. כשמך צורבת השפתיים, כי נשיקת זרב, אם אשכחך ירושלים, אשר כולה זהב. ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור. ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור.
בימים עלומים של פרעות והנים, הלילות השמונים של ייאוש. בערים בכפרים את דגלינו נרים, ועליו הגנה וחינוך. לא גויסנו פשוט המון עבדים ולשפוט בניך לתקן. ברצוננו להיות לעולם נבואים, חלומנו למות בארצנו. בימים אדומים של פרעות ודמים, בלילות השחורים של ייאוש. ולכן בכפרים את דגלנו נרים, ועלה הגנה וחיבור.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody, and welcome to this week's World Alliance of Qara'im Torah study. I am Hakham Melech ben Yaakov of the World Alliance of Qara'im, and as usual, we have for you a nice, detailed, yet hopefully fun, exciting, interesting Torah study. And we are cool. Sound is good. And we are in Parashat Mishpatim this week, which is basically kind of the first, aside from the laws of Passover, it's really the first parsha where we speak about laws in the Torah. Up to now, it's been lots of stories. Of course, we have the Ten Commandments. We have some laws specifically about the Passover and a couple of other things here and there. But now we get into some of the more legalistic aspects of the Torah, and we find out what Yahweh has in mind for us, how we're supposed to live our lives. Well, one of the ways we're supposed to live our lives is in the extended land of Israel, from the Euphrates River to the Sea of Egypt. And I've been working a lot lately on Your Jerusalem, the newspaper I published in Jerusalem between 1997 and 1999, about 2.5 years. I published an actual physical newspaper in Jerusalem. It came out once a month. We would publish anywhere between 15,000 and 25,000 copies. We distributed for free all over Jerusalem. It was sustained by advertising, and me being not the best businessman in the world, being much more of an idealist than a businessman, I couldn't sustain the economic side of it and had to close it down after 2.5 years. But years later, I put it back up on the web, and every now and then I'd go back to it and add an article here, add an article there. Well, after October 7th, I don't know, it just lit a fire under my my tuchus, and I just wanted to start working on it again. I mean, this was my baby back in the day. I would work endlessly on it. It was truly a labor of love. So I would like to introduce, I've mentioned it here and there, but I would like to introduce everybody to the newspaper. And I'm not using this as a plug. There's a reason I want to go to the newspaper, because I'm going to read an article that I wrote a number of years ago, and I think you'll see the relevance of it. So let's just do this. Boom. So there is Your Jerusalem. The website is www.yourjerusalem.org. I'll post it. In fact, let's do it this way. Your Jerusalem.org. Shabbat Shalom, Desiree. And I'll just show that. Okay. So you could check out the newspaper. And this is I'm not making a dime off the newspaper right now. If I ever do start to make a profit off the newspaper, I don't know how I'll do that. But if I ever do, if it grows, then then at some point I might pay writers, all this kind of stuff. But right now I don't make a single dime off it. This is completely a labor of love. So I'm asking people, if you have any idea, if you have an article that you would like to submit, it should be relevant in some way or another to Israel, to Judaism, to something that's going on in Israel. But it doesn't necessarily have to concern itself with Israel. It could be stuff that's going on in the United States, in the world. So if you have any ideas and you would like to submit an idea or an article, then please do. You can just send it to me at yourjerusalem@gmail.org. This article that I put up here on recently a couple days ago is very interesting. This is actually this was written by the brother of one of my best friends in high school. That friend since died. He had a lot of medical problems, and he died, unfortunately, at around the age of 40, about 10 years ago. And his older brother, his father, who escaped the Holocaust, wrote an article about their family's experiences before and after Kristallnacht, and then how they escaped Austria and ultimately came to the United States. And this is an absolutely fascinating article. But that's not why I brought up Your Jerusalem. I brought up Your Jerusalem because I was looking through some of the old articles, and there was one that I wrote in 2014, I think it was. If I could just find it here for a second. And I think this will speak to everyone, not just people living in Israel. It really speaks also, I think, to Americans and maybe to people around the world. And I would like to read at least part of it and show what was on my mind at the time. And then I guess whoever wants to continue reading it could, but I'm going to read part of it right now. Let's see if I can make it bigger so people can see. There we go. So this I wrote in 2014. December 31st, 2014 is when it was published. So I'll just read this. It is said that the worst kind of slavery is mental slavery, when a slave actually believes he is free. The black slave in the American South, who is given an extra portion of pig slop and allowed to be unchained for one night as a reward for good behavior, might have the tendency to run around the plantation and proclaim his great freedom, shouting out to everybody what a kind master he has. This is only because he has never known true freedom, so in comparison to his usual situation, he believes he has finally achieved nirvana. One of the tricks of that individuals, organizations, and governments use to oppress people is to convince them that they are actually free under their reign, and that their reign is necessary for the people's own safety and protection. Like a mafia running a protection racket, governments do this by brainwashing their enslaved populations into believing that they are actually, meaning the government is actually their protectors and benefactors, that without the current government, their situation would be much worse, and that they would either die or live a life of poverty and constant danger. The current state of Israel, and this was written back in 2014, but I think it applies more than ever now. The current state of Israel constantly tries to convince us, the people of Israel, that they are the protectors and benefactors of the Jewish people, that they have only our best interests in mind. They constantly praise themselves and pat themselves on the back, calling themselves a great democracy, the protector of human rights, liberal, etc. On the other hand, they present the Torah as oppressive and primitive. In addition, they pretend to love the Arabs, but in fact, they despise the Arabs and their culture and wish to educate, quote unquote, the quote unquote poor savages in their quote unquote enlightened Western ways. Thank God the Arabs are too smart to fall for this. They also wish to educate us, the people of Israel, in these quote unquote enlightened ways and to wean us off our primitive and barbaric Torah. In short, the current state of Israel is run essentially by a bunch of modern day Hellenists who've adopted American Western culture as their gods in place of the God of Israel. However, is it a true assumption that life is really better under the enlightened westernized government of Israel, and that we would suffer a life of horrible oppression under a Torah government? Let us take the issue of land ownership as a case in point. The Torah entitles every single Israelite, bar none, to a permanent inheritance in the land of Israel. This means that each one of us, from the moment we are born until the day we die, is a landowner, and our family's plot of land can never, ever be taken away from us, not by other Israelites, not by foreigners, and certainly not by the government. This is the importance of the Jubilee year mentioned in Leviticus chapter 25, which comes every 50 years. In the Jubilee year, each plot of land returns to its original owner, i.e. you and me. You and I may rent out our plots of land for a period of time, up to and including a long-term lease of 50 years, but our plots can never be permanently sold. They return to each one of us at the Jubilee year. It is no wonder that Leviticus 25:10 tells us that on the Jubilee year, we proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. That, by the way, is the verse that is written on the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia. By comparison, under the current government of Israel, who owns the land? Is it we, the people of Israel? No, the government of Israel does. In fact, the government of Israel owns approximately 97% of all the land in the state of Israel. Aside from a very small percentage of land, we are not allowed to own land in our own country. So much for democracy. The closest we can come is to lease long-term from the government for 50 or 99 years, but at the end of that period, the land reverts back to the state of Israel. In other words, this is just the opposite of what the Torah envisions. Whereas in the Torah, we, the people, are the eternal landowners, and we rent out our land to whomever we please, including to the government. In the current reality, under the so-called liberal state of Israel, it is the government which is the eternal landowner, and they rent our own land back to us. and we pay them rent for it. This makes us essentially landless serfs living on the land owned by our masters, exactly the opposite of what Yahweh and the Torah intended. Make no mistake about what I'm saying. The state of Israel has stolen every inch of land of Israel from us, the people of Israel. So ask yourself, is this true freedom? The government of Israel wishes to convince you and me that we are free under them, that they are our benefactors and protector, our benefactor and protector. Further, they wish to convince us that if we were ever to have a Torah government instead of them, then we would return to the primitive days of oppression. We must ask ourselves if this is true, or a lie perpetuated by the Hellenized, westernized, leftist, apostate state of Israel for the benefit of its ruling elite. Do you feel free? If you are free, then why do you run around and work like a dog just to pay rent at the end of the month? Is this what you dreamed of when you first made Aliyah? Why do you pay such a high percentage of your hard-earned money in taxes to this government? Why do you pay $250,000 or $500,000 to live in the dirt and noise of the city in some concrete box known as a dirah apartment, rather than pay 1/10 the price to build your own house or even mansion out on your own portion of the land of Israel, which is given to you for free and can never be taken away? Are you really free under the government of Israel, or are you just a slave who has never known real freedom and therefore thinks he is free? If Zev Jabotinsky and the revisionists had taken over the state of Israel back in the 1940s, instead of the current West-worshipping ilk, think about where we might be right now. Would we be getting killed in the streets every day, having our blood spilled by another nation which lives in our land and hates us? Would we be crammed into large, dirty cities and run-down apartment blocks, barely able to pay for rent, food, and electricity? No, we would have been sitting on a large, wealthy, prosperous state of Israel, which extends across both sides of the Jordan River and perhaps way beyond. We would be sitting on a great wealth of natural resources, which would have made all of our people wealthy, not just the government and a few privileged elites. We would be living, each of us, on our own plot of land, in our own houses, with our own wives and children. We would have been a prosperous, proud, and free people. I would probably be writing this editorial right now while barbecuing hot dogs on the banks of the Euphrates River. And yet, we have allowed these nochim, taskmasters, see Exodus 5:6, to control us and convince us, those were the taskmasters, the Jewish taskmasters, over the slaves in Egypt, and convince us that we are free under them, when in fact we are slaves. They are more than happy to watch us drug ourselves up with Western poisons, such as American television, cigarettes, Coca-Cola, and pharmaceutical drugs, which ensure that we remain weak and preoccupied so that we don't bother them, while all the while they collect huge profits off the sales of these products to us. They do not even allow each one of us, the people of Israel, to carry weapons in our own land to defend ourselves. This very basic right of a person to defend himself has been taken away from us, proving perhaps more than anything that we are not free people under the government of Israel, but slaves. We, the slaves, must always be disarmed, for our taskmasters, far more than they fear the Arabs, fear that we might someday rise up against them in a slave rebellion. So we are left vulnerable to the whims of those who live in our land and are determined to spill our blood and destroy us. In fact, the leftist elite deliberately uses the Arabs to terrorize our people, particularly the brave settlers of Yehuda and Shomron. This is the Kafkaesque reality we live in the land of Israel, and therefore each and every one of us must ask ourselves, who exactly are the people who run this country? What is their belief system? What is their goal? Is it to protect the people of Israel and to help us prosper? Or is it to control us and enslave us for their masters in America and Europe, and in return for enslaving their own people to receive money, awards, accolades, fame, appearances on television, high salaries, and invitations to travel around the world and meet all kinds of VIPs? Think, if you cannot become physically free at this moment, then at least become mentally free. Don't be so enslaved that you don't even know you're a slave. Don't be so enslaved as to think that your oppressors and abusers are actually your benefactors and protectors, just because they throw you enough crumbs and pig slop for you to live a sustenance existence. Did we leave our countries of origin and come to the land of Israel to live a sustenance existence? No, we came here to fulfill our dreams. It's time for us as a nation to wake up to the pathetic current reality, and only then will we find the path to freedom. Let's hope and pray that this can be done with a political solution, because if it cannot, then, mark my words, there will come a time when the people can stand it no longer and will take matters into their own hands. This will include not just the religious right, but a large swath of the population who will come to realize the level of oppression they currently live under in this country. Melech Ben Yaakov, editor-in-chief. So that was my editorial from about, well, almost 10 years ago now. And I still stand by every single word of it. You have to understand that the state of Israel has set itself up essentially as an outpost of the West, and therefore it is not ultimately loyal and beholden to the people of Israel. It is certainly not beholden to the Torah of Israel, and it is certainly not beholden to the God of Israel, Yahweh. It is beholden to the United States of America and the West. That is what Israel is beholden to, and the United States of America and the West. I'm not saying all people in the United States and the West hate the Jews and hate Israel, but that is essentially it being a Christian, those being Christian lands. They essentially despise the Jews, despise the Jewish people, look down on the Jews, see the Torah as primitive, see the Torah as outdated and barbarian. And so this is what the people of, one second. Sorry about that interruption. Okay. So that is essentially, we have to understand that the Christian West, they despise, they are by their nature anti-Semites. They despise the Torah. They believe in replacement theology. They believe that the nation of Israel, the only purpose that the nation of Israel is to remain around is so that they can prove to a couple of the remaining Jews how great Jesus is and that Jesus was the Messiah and that we were wrong all the time. And that is what the government of Israel is. They are an outpost. They are the Nogshim. They're the taskmasters in Israel over the Jews to promote this idea. And so therefore, the government of Israel and the leaders of Israel are not interested in promoting the welfare of the Jewish people. They're interested in acting as the taskmasters over the Jewish people to put forth and to basically control the Jews, to fence them in, to discourage their reaching their true potential, which would mean following the Torah, returning to Yahweh, expanding the territory of Israel out to the Euphrates River, out to the river of Egypt, and instead they're there, just as the United States of America right now sent its military, sent its aircraft carrier, and sends its advisors all the time, Blinken and the rest of the ilk, not to help Israel. They can say whatever they want, but they're not there to help Israel. They're there to constrain Israel, and they are there to prevent Israel from really busting out and reaching its full potential. And just as we need to throw off our slave masters, just as we in Egypt needed to throw off our slave masters, so we need to throw off our slave masters. We need to throw off the slave masters that are over us in the land of Israel. We have the foreign slave masters run by the Jewish slave masters who control the masses of the Jews in Israel. And this must change. This has to change. And maybe if one good thing is to come out of what is happening right now in the war in Gaza, is that it will make a complete revolution in Israel, and all the ilk that form the leadership and the elite class of Israel will be completely gotten rid of one way or another. And the people of Israel will completely reach their potential at some time in the future, and sometime near in the future. So that's what I have to say. That is my opening statement for the day. Again, check out www.yourjerusalem.org. If you have any ideas for articles, please send them in, and we will take it from there. Okay, sorry about that interruption again. So that's what I have to say. Times are coming, days are coming, changes are coming, and I think more and more the people of Israel are waking up and realizing that the current leadership is completely inadequate to be the vessels through which Israel reaches its potential. And people have already realized a long time ago that the rabbis and rabbinical Judaism are completely the incorrect method and approach and vessels to be the future of the nation of Israel and allow it to reach its potential. Okay, that being said, let me hide that. And let's go on to this week's Torah study. Any comments? Any questions? Alrighty. Okay, so let's see what we got here. Okay, so we're in Parshat Mishpatim, and that is Exodus 21. We read through Exodus 20 last week. Exodus 20 is the Ten Commandments. And then it's a couple of other things that we mentioned at the end. So this is the end of the Ten Commandments, Exodus 20. And then just to summarize, the people at that point said, enough, we don't want to hear anymore. We don't want God to speak directly to us. We're afraid. Let God speak to Moses, and then Moses will tell us. Okay? The people remained at a distance while Moses approached the thick darkness where God was. And then Yahweh says a couple of other things. Do not make any gods alongside me. Do not make for yourselves gods of silver and gods of gold. And then speaks about the altar that must be made either out of dirt or out of unhewn stones, stones that are naturally found, that are not chopped with a weapon or with a sword or with a knife, chisel, and no steps on the altar. Okay? All right. Now we go to Exodus chapter 21. And again, this is right after the Ten Commandments are given. And now these are a bunch of laws. The Israelites have requested that Moses not speak to them directly. And so now Moses is going to relate to them a whole bunch of laws, not directly from Yahweh, but these are not going to be spoken directly to Yahweh. But this is Yahweh speaking to Moses. These are the laws you are to set before them. So let's go to the Hebrew. And we're in Exodus 21. "21:1. Wa'ele Mishpatim asher tasim lifnehem." These are the judgments, literally, that you will place before them. So there are a number of words that the Torah uses to describe laws. Chukim, mishpatim, mitzvot. Chukim is usually translated as statutes. Mishpatim is judgments. Torot, instructions. Mitzvot, commandments. They're all essentially interchangeable in many contexts. The rabbis make a big deal about the difference between chukim and mishpatim. They say chukim can't be understood, whereas mishpatim can be understood. I fail to see a difference between the meanings of these words in many contexts. In some contexts, they do have specific meanings, like the word Torah. In most of the contexts throughout the Torah, actually doesn't mean the Torah, the entire Torah. It means a set of instructions about a certain specific topic. But essentially, they're kind of interchangeable. And we know that the Torah will use synonyms to express itself. It does this very often, and the fact that the words are different is not meant to be read into too much. It's just the way that the Torah expresses itself. It uses repetition and synonyms to emphasize or to approach things from different points of view, to kind of reiterate or to fortify ideas. So just pointing that out, because here it says these are mishpatim, these are judgments. Okay, it essentially just means laws. You could say mishpat means that these are laws that are adjudicated by the shofet. Shofet is the judge. The book of Judges in Hebrew is called Sefer Shoftim, the book of Judges. So shofet comes from the underlying root shafat, shin, pei, tet, which means to judge. So mishpatim would be translated best as judgments, and so these may be interpreted in this context as judgments that judges may make, because we're not talking here about religious law per se. We're talking really about kind of criminal and tort law, as we shall see. We shall also see that not everything is clear. I'm sorry, that not everything is clear. Some of the laws are, a bit up for debate, as is everything in the Torah in this day and age, since we really don't know all of the answers. We've been disconnected from our ancient culture. We've been disconnected from prophecy for thousands of years now. But we'll try to go through them and make as much sense as we can out of them. So we're starting now in verse 2. And for this, I will bring up some commentaries. Let's go for, I guess we'll do Robert Alter as we usually do. Bring them up. He's good because he really quotes a lot of other commentaries. This commentary it's good and it's accessible. Again, I don't want you to think that I'm just worship at the feet of Robert Alter. There are some times that I disagree with him, but I overall think it's a very good starting point. Let me bring it up again. So we're in Exodus 21. Let's see here. Exodus 21. Page 721. 721. So regarding that first verse, let's see, we'll do a little Robert Alter on that one. So after the 10 divine imperatives, couched in absolute terms and addressed to each Israelite in the second person singular, you shall, you shall, you shall, you shall not, do not. We have a series of miscellaneous laws formulated casuistically, i.e., according to the hypothetical case, should a man do X? This collection of laws, which make up chapter 21 through chapter 23, is conventionally called the Book of the Covenant. In accordance with the phrase used in 24:7, and Moses took the Book of the Covenant and read it in the hearing of the people, though some scholars have questioned whether the text referred to that Moses reads to the people is really the same as this legal miscellany. It's probably one of the oldest collections of laws in the Bible. That's documentary hypothesis stuff. It exhibits numerous parallels with, as well as divergences from, the Code of Hammurabi, with sundry other Sumerian Akkadian codes with Hittite law, all of which have been abundantly studied in scholarly literature. If you ever get a chance to read through the Code of Hammurabi, it's in many ways frighteningly close to the Torah. For instance, the famous example that's given is the eye. It says an eye for an eye in the Code of Hammurabi. I don't think it says that exact phrase, but if you put out someone's eye, your eye shall be put out, I think is the way it phrases it. Get it if you ever get a chance, read through the Code of Hammurabi, even part of it, and you'll be like, wow, this is uncannily close to the Torah. But as Robert Alter just pointed out, as close as it is to the Torah, it's also very different from the Torah. The Code of Hammurabi is extremely cruel. It's been a while since I read it, but let's see. I think if you, I might be quoting it wrong, but if you steal money, then you are put to death. Or no, I can't remember. I'm probably getting it wrong, but it's something like if you steal money, then you are put to death. If you build someone's house incorrectly, then you are put in your house, and your house is destroyed on top of you. In other words, your house is destroyed, and you're in it, and you're crushed to death under the house. Again, I'm probably quoting that wrong. It's been a while since I looked through the whole code of Hammurabi, but it's a really cruel code, but it is in many ways uncannily similar to the laws in the Torah. So, okay, here we go. So, so if she shall purchase a Hebrew slave, so there's a distinction made between a Hebrew slave and an Israelite slave and a non-Israelite slave. Israelite slaves are not treated as slaves. They're basically treated as household members who need to pay off a debt. They're kind of treated as part of the family. Non-Israelite slaves also are not treated badly, but they're not given the same, all in the family kind of treatment that a Hebrew slave is. The idea of a Hebrew slave it's generally understood, and it's alluded to in a number of verses. I don't think in these verses here, but in other places that slavery was a way to work off debt. So Hebrew slaves were not really slaves per se. They were indentured servants. If they could not pay off their debt, then they did so by essentially becoming an indentured servant to another Israelite to whom they owe the money. So it's a distinction. Okay, so here we're talking about an Avid Ivri, a Hebrew slave. So Sheish Shanim Yavod, and there's a maximum amount of time that he can be. I don't even like the word used. Oh, Shushi boy, my cat is looking at me. Oh, Sean, what do you want, sweetheart? Are you hungry? All right, let me give the cat a little snack. You want to give him a little food bowl? I'm in the middle now. Just please be quiet, and you can give him food, okay? So the maximum time that a Hebrew slave can remain indentured to his master is 6 years. That's it. That's the maximum, except we'll see an exception below. On the 7th year, he goes free. So this should not come as so much a surprise. We have other examples where things are set free on the 7th year. So on the 7th year, if we look in Leviticus 25, which we're not going to now, I'm just going to mention it. We know the 7th year is the year of rest, what's later called the Shemitah year, for the land. The land rests. You're not allowed to sow. You're not allowed to carry out the agricultural cycle every 7th year in the land of Israel, and you just live off the produce from the previous year. Likewise, in the 7th year, debts are canceled. Debts for poor people are canceled. And as we see, not in that 7th year, but also after 7 years, so that's in a 7-year cycle. This is not part of the 7-year cycle, but it's similar, right? 6 years, whenever you come in on the 7th year as an indentured servant to another Hebrew, then on the 7th year, you're set free. So what am I trying to say? The Shemitah year, the 7th year, is on a 7-year cycle. So I don't remember the exact years. I think it was a year ago or 2 years ago. But let's say the first Shemitah year is the year 2000. Then the next one will be 2007. The next one, 2014. The next one, 2021, etc. This is not the case with a Hebrew slave. A Hebrew slave, if he enters into servitude to another Hebrew on 2003, then he's let out on 2009, at the beginning of 2009, right? So he's indentured for 6 years. It's not on a 7-year cycle. But it's similar in the sense that it's 6 years, 7th year is freedom. Of course, this harkens back to the idea of Shabbat. We work for 6 days. On the 7th day, we rest. In fact, in Leviticus 25, if you look at the 7-year agricultural cycle, the word Shabbat is used for that 7th year. It's actually called the year of rest, It's never called the Shemitah year. That's the later Hebrew name for it. It's never called the Shemitah year in the Tanakh. At least not to the best of my recollection. It's called the year of the Shabbat, the year of rest. It's the day that the land rests. It's the day that debts are released. And then, of course, we have a 50-year cycle as well. That's the Jubilee year, which I mentioned in the article from Your Jerusalem that I read previously. And that is akin to Shavuot. So there are 7 years. There's 7 cycles of 7 years. And then on the 50th year is another year called the Jubilee year. And then more stuff happens, including what I read in the article, where everyone's land inheritance goes back to them, among other things. Okay, so just to put everything in perspective, we see this throughout the Torah, we see this throughout the Tanakh. This 6-year cycle followed by a 7th year of freedom. 6-year cycle followed by a 7th year of freedom, or 6-day cycle of work followed by the 7th day of rest. 6 years of agricultural planting of the land followed by a 7th year in which the land of Israel rests. Okay? All right. Let's move on. So, b'shvi'it yaseh la hoshi hinam. So in the 7th year, he goes free without any obligations. Hinam means, well, in modern Hebrew, chinam means free. So if someone wants to give a free piece of pizza, they'll say, here, take this for free. So here it means without any obligations. And I'm curious to see how Robert Alter translates that one. Probably similar. With no payment. Okay. I would say without any obligations. In other words, he's paid off. That's it. He's paid off his debt. He's done. He doesn't owe anything at that point to his master, no matter how much he owed before. So it's interesting that no matter how much you owe, the maximum that you could be indentured as an Israelite by another Israelite is 6 years. No more than that. That's the max. Okay? Im bi gapo yavo bi gapo yitzeh. I'll explain that in a second. Im ba'al isha hu wa yasa ishto ba'imo. So if he comes in literally with the shirt on his back, by himself, they translate it here, by himself. So gapo, I'm assuming, comes from the underlying root guf, which means a body. Right. Okay. So if he comes in just by himself, meaning only with his body, then he goes out by himself. Imba alisha, if he's already married, if he's already the husband to a woman, then his wife goes out. Then his wife goes out with him. Okay. Why is that mentioned? Because we're going to contrast it here. Verse 4. Im Adono yitin lo isha with yalda lo banim or banot. So if his master gives him a wife and she gives birth to sons or daughters, Aisha with yiladeha tien adoneha wehu yitze bi rapo. So if his master gives him a wife and she gives birth to sons and daughters, then the wife and the children belong to her master. It says to her master, and he goes out himself. So I always found this law a little bit strange, and in my eyes, a little bit cruel, I must say, but there is a way out of that. But I have to be honest. I'm honest when I see something that strikes me a little bit wrong. I always found that law to be a little bit cruel, right? Because now you have to separate from your wife and your children just because your master gave you the wife and the children. Well, verse 5 says, Im amor yomar ha'eved ahavti et adoni et ishti wa et banai lo tzeh chofshi. And if he says, if the slave, the indentured Hebrew should say, I love my master, my wife, and my children. I don't want to go out to freedom. In other words, I'd rather remain. Why? Higisho אדונהו אל האלוהים, והגישו אל הדלת, או אל המזוזה, ורצה אדונהו את אוזנו במרצעה, ועבדו לעולם. So he says, I don't want to leave my wife. I don't want to leave my children. I have a good setup here. My master's, I love being part of my master's household. Then his master shall bring him. This is usually translated to the judges. I don't think that that has any indication here at all that this word Elohim means judges, but that's usually the way it's translated. I think it means to God, and probably therefore means up to the tabernacle, up to the Beit HaMikdash, where perhaps the main judge sits. But it's often interpreted as judges, and his master puts him up against the door or against the mezuzah. The mezuzah is the doorposts. And his master, he pierces his ear with they usually translate it as an awl, A-W-L. I have no idea what an awl is. I never have. So it's like a spear or an arrow or something like that. Okay? And he now serves him forever. So if after 6 years he's become attached to his situation, he has a wife, he has children that his master has given him, he's likes his master, he likes the whole setup, then there's a ceremony where he becomes his Eved Nirtzah, as the modern Israeli phrase comes from this, of course, where basically there's a ceremony where the master takes an arrow, pierces it through his ear, meaning through his earlobe, into the door, and I would imagine that this is the door of the master's house. And this now symbolizes that he's attached to his master's house until he dies. It says literally forever, but obviously it's not forever. It just means until he dies. Okay? So that's the situation. It's kind of a strange law. Let's get a little commentary on it. So we'll go to Robert Alter again, then maybe we'll look at some other commentaries. Pointedly, the first laws in the group deal with the regulation of slavery, addressed in the narrative situation to an audience of newly freed slaves. That situation may dictate the somewhat unexpected designation Hebrew slave, because that was the identity of the Israelites and their Egyptian masters. Hebrew general, okay, that's a nice little drush, but I don't want to focus on this. What is clearly involved is not chattel slavery, but what amounts to a kind of indentured servitude, as we mentioned. The Bible does not question this institution, but sets certain limits on it. And as one can see in the subsequent laws, the slave retains basic human rights. So, bikapo might mean, according to Umberto Casuto, the corner or wing of a garment. If this is the case, it would have the idiomatic force of with the shirt on his back and nothing else. And this is the case in verse 4, where his master gave him a wife and they had children. The evident implication is that the master gave this slave girl to the male slave for breeding purposes, not for sentimental reasons. The next verse, however, reflects a recognition that even in such brutally economic circumstances, the man may develop an emotional attachment to the woman and to their children. If the man shall solemnly say, the emphatic force here of the infinitive followed by the conjugated verb amor yomar is to indicate a performative speech act, a binding public declaration. I disagree with that. I think it's to emphasize that he really has to want it. So repetition is emphasis, as I say pretty much every Torah study. So here it says, Va'im amor yomar, if he should certainly say. But it really says, if he shall say. If this slave shall say, I love my master, my wife, and my children. So I think that this is pointing out the fact that he really has to want it. The repetition here means that it's not the usual situation. It's kind of, he's really got to show, it's really got to be his desire to stay on as a slave, right? So I actually disagree with Robert Alter on that one. He's saying that this is now this thing, he has to say it almost like a speech. And I disagree with that. It's a minor point, but it doesn't matter. Okay, make him approach the gods and make him approach the door or the doorpost. The word translated here as gods, Elohim, is a famous. Oh, duty. Duty balls. Where do we go? 721. Try that again. So make him approach the gods. So, okay, we spoke about this. The word Elohim here is a famous crux. Crux meaning it's always been a difficult word to translate. And it's usually translated as judges, right? So, Igisho Adonau Ela Elohim. So his master shall take him to the judges. But I disagree with that translation. So here Robert Alter is solving this by saying it means to the gods. So let's read what he has to say. Though plural in form, when it is treated grammatically as a singular, it usually means God. When it's treated as a plural, it usually means gods, although occasionally it appears to designate some sort of celestial beings who are less than God. In this sequence, one cannot tell whether it is singular or plural. Rabbinic tradition sought to avert any possible scandal in the verse by interpreting Elohim as judges. But the philological evidence for that understanding is slim, I agree. The most plausible proposal that has been made is that the reference to the household gods, there are several ancient Near Eastern documents indicating blah, 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 blah. Okay? I disagree with that. Obviously, this is coming from a secular Bible scholar idea that the Israelites were not always monotheistic, that they were polytheistic, then they embraced polytheism, then what's called monarchy, and then ultimately monotheism. So polytheism is where you have a pantheon of gods. Monarchy is where you have a pantheon of gods, but there's one chief god, kind of like the Greeks have their pantheon of gods, but Zeus is the boss, or the Hindus with their millions upon millions of gods. But who's the boss there? They have three: Vishnu, and I don't know, it's the god of creation, god of destruction. I forget. I visited before I left the United States a bunch of years ago. I used to visit from time to time in Queens, New York. There's a huge Hindu temple, and I would go there for the food. In the basement of this temple is an Indian canteen, Southern Indian food. It's actually, I think, visited by Anthony Bourdain on one of his shows before he committed suicide. And I would go there on a regular basis. And sometimes out of curiosity, I would just go up to the top of the temple where the actual temple was, just to see what idol worship was like. And it was fascinating and sickening at the same time. And I remember, so there are three main gods. There's Vishnu. Oh God, it's been a while. I don't remember. Who cares? It doesn't matter. I'm not even going to mention their damn names. But I do remember that there were statues for each of these three gods. And around each of the gods was a little fence with a sign, "Do not touch the gods," or "Do not touch the god." So that's, if you ever want to see polytheism in action, I got to look it up now. Three chief gods. Here we go. There we go. Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the preserver, and Shiva, the destroyer. So, I mean, if you ever want to see just how sickening idol worship is, go visit a Hindu temple. I truly, truly recommend it. I mean, if there were no law against it, I would have burnt the place to the ground. But, I don't like sitting in jail. So I didn't. But hopefully someday. It is truly, truly sickening. And the idea that Hinduism is presented as like this wise, ancient religion. It's idol worship. It's sickening. It's disgusting. It's filthy. It's so disgusting. Go there and see these statues, these idols of gold and silver, and you will be sickened to your stomach. I highly recommend that everyone who can go visit a Hindu temple, because idol worship is mentioned so many times as as basically, I mean, it's in the Torah, in the Tanakh, it is up there with murder. Murder and idol worship are really, if one had to point out the two most severe or horrible sins in the Torah, it's really those two: murder and idol worship. And we don't know what idol worship is like. It's something that's abstract to us because we're not surrounded by it. Yes, we see statues of Jesus all over the place if we live in Western countries. But we don't really internalize Jesus as like an idol, because the Christians have this theology of the Trinity, and they say, oh, it's not really a separate God, and the tripartite Godhead and all that baloney. But if you want to really see, I mean, Jesus is an idol for sure, but I guess we're so accustomed to it in the West that we don't really think of it as such. But if you go to a Hindu temple, then it will really strike you as to how disgusting idol worship is, because we're really in the West so separated from it, aside from the Jesus baloney. So I recommend, if you have a Hindu temple anywhere near you, go to it. And let's see, Hindu temple, Queens, New York. Let me show you. So this is the place. I wonder if they show inside. So there's some of it. Those are some of the lesser gods. They have a bunch of gods there, but there you go, a bunch of gods. So a woman praying and meditating in front of statues of gods and goddesses in the Hindu temple society. And of course, a big popular god these days is Shiva. So if you ever want to, don't sit Shiva, but you can sit on Shiva's face if you ever want to disgrace another idol. No, not Shiva. What's his name? Oh, jeez. Hindu god with 100 arms. What's his name again? Hindu god, elephant god. Ganesh. There we go. So I used to go to an Indian restaurant. I won't say where, but I do love Indian food. And I would go to a certain Indian restaurant, and as you entered the restaurant, there would be a statue of Ganesh there with food, like sitting before it. Like they would bring offerings to this statue. And it was kind of in a corner. And as you walk into the restaurant and nobody could see it, there was no one that could look at you. So I would always, whenever I'd walk into the restaurant, I would spit in Ganesh's face. Yes, I'm very proud to say that. Okay. So that's idol worship. It is truly sickening. Let's read some comments here. Okay. Nothing I need to comment on there, but yes, I agree with most of those comments. So, right. So Robert Alter is saying that this word Elohim means gods, because he is taking the secular approach to the development of monotheism in Israel, as moving from polytheism to monotry to monotheism. Polytheism being, again, worshiping a pantheon of gods. Monotry means there's a pantheon, but there's really one chief god. Again, like the Greeks with Zeus, or the Hindus with their main god, I guess, is Vishnu, the creator. And then monotheism, where all other gods are deprecated or eliminated, and only one God remains. So he's coming from a secular point of view, and hence this comment. I'm just going to skip it because it's kind of stupid, to be honest. So I think the best explanation I've heard is, and I've stuck with this explanation for many years, is that when it says take to the Elohim, it doesn't mean judges, as the rabbis say. It means up to the place where God's presence dwells, God's glory dwells, meaning to the tabernacle, or later on to the temple. Okay. All righty. Pearson's ear with an awl. So let's get a picture of an awl. In fact, maybe I'll just type out the entire verse. Pierce is ear with an awl. So let's get a visual of that. I guess something like that. Okay. Like that. Like, these all kind of look weird, but you get the idea, right? So, as many people have pointed out over the years that I've read, this is a way of saying that that person is now, and so the context would again imply that it's to the door of the house of his master, which is a bit strange. Maybe it's because he's now going up to, if Elohim means the chief judge, up, in the tabernacle or temple, then maybe it means a door there, or it would be logical that it means the door of his master's house because he's now being permanently attached to his master's house. So maybe he goes up to the judges, and I don't know. I have to be honest where I don't know. We could read some commentary on it. Maybe we will. Okay. Again, let's see what Robert Alter says. There's no consensus here on the symbolism, though it is not implausible that the ear might be thought of as the organ of obedience. Perhaps no symbolism is intended, in piercing the ear as a way of permanently marking the perpetual slave without serious mutilation. Or perhaps the pierced ear might have been used to wear a ring bearing the master's mark or initial. And let's see, where can we go? Let's try, usually refer to this source, but let's give it a shot. This cultural background thingy. Oh, I think it's only Genesis, right? I think it's only Genesis. Let's see here. But I can get online too. Genesis. And then it goes into the New Testament. But let's look at, let's see if I can get it online for a second. Cultural backgrounds, Bible, cultural backgrounds, Bible. Online. Internet Archive, I think that's it. Maybe. Yeah, that's it. About 1 hour, sure. Let's do it. Okay. Okie dokie. Do that. Do that. Two-page view. Okay, whatever. And now we got to go to the right page. Come on. Stuck. Okay, that's Numbers, Leviticus, Exodus, 10. This is 13. This is 15. We're getting there. Oh boy. No, skip ahead a little bit. X is 30. Overshot the landing pad. This is 25. It's got to be close. X is 22. X is 21. Okay. So let's see if there's any commentary here. Servants. Okay. All right. So here's what this Hebrew or Bible culture, what's it called? Cultural Backgrounds Study Bible says. Let me just use this little tool over here. So 21:4, reading over there. Only the man shall go free when a free man gave a wife to another man who owed him something, certain conditions applied to that marriage. The man in the inferior position was often a pledge, one who worked as a servant, not a slave, and whose services functioned as. I think I gotta read this. Go back up here. As. Oh, this is fun. Oh, it's fun. I like using this little tool. Woo, it's like finger painting. Okay. All right. Hold on, got a drink. Okay. As security or collateral for debt that was owed or debt slave, as here in Exodus. Typically, the pledge or debt slave could take his wife and any children she had borne him only by satisfying particular requirements. The record of a contract from the city of Imar, 13th century BC, presents an example of such a situation. The pledge in this case may take his wife and children with him when he leaves the service of his creditor, but only if he abides by the basic agreement set forth in the contract. When this document addresses the possibility that the pledge might renege on his commitment to abide by the contract, then the pledge will have no claim to his wife and children. This law in Exodus may be establishing what was standard procedure in these types of situations. Modifications were probably allowed if clearly established in contractual agreement. All right, I think we get the idea, right? So he does have a way to stay forever if he wants. So I don't know. I always find this law a little bit problematic, because what if he loves his wife and children but hates his master? Now he has a dilemma, right? But then again, the laws in the Torah are ultimately adjudicated by judges. And to quote secular Bible scholar Joel Baden, he says the laws of the Torah are illustrative at best, meaning they give an idea, the direction that the judges judge. They're not absolute. And I might actually agree with that point of view, because the Torah doesn't give every single law. It kind of gives, it's like the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution of the United States, and my good friend Yohanan Ben Dawid, who is back on Facebook lately and who I've met in person, and he's a great guy. He said many years ago to me, and this always stuck in my mind, that the Torah is the Constitution of Israel. And I think it's a great analogy, because the Torah doesn't give every single law on how to live your life from the moment you are born to the moment you die. It gives many laws, and by internalizing those laws, the people of Israel and the judges are supposed to get an idea of, they're kind of supposed to fill in the blanks. Oh, that sounds like an oral law, like that of the rabbis, doesn't it now? Well, there's some big differences between what I just said and the oral law of the rabbis. First of all, the oral law of the rabbis fills the blanks in very, very illogical ways. That's number one. Number two, they hold these laws, their fill-in, their illogical fill-in, to be binding. In other words, they're essentially adding it to the Torah, where I don't think that's the way the Torah works. The Torah has the written law, and that written law is supposed to be internalized by the judges, and then the judge, using his own wisdom and his knowledge of the written law, is then supposed to judge the people, not using the precedents necessarily of other judges. There's an article on Karaite Insights that I did not write, but I published it many years ago on Karaite Insights, which speaks about this in more detail. If you want to check it out, it's into the library. Yeah, this one here. So you read this article, Was There a Pharisaic Revolution Against the Old Order? It really goes into more detail about this. It's a brilliant article, and I can say so because I did not write it, but I'll post it here. Okay. Okay, so let's move on. So we get the idea. Oh, I'm sorry, we did that. Verse 7. וכי ימכור איש את ביתו לעמה לא תצא צאת העבדים. And if a man should sell his daughter as a maidservant, basically as a concubine, לא תצא צאת עבדים, she will not go out as slaves go out. In other words, the laws that we read above do not apply to her. Verse 8. אם ראה בעיני אדוניה אשר לא יעדה והפדה לעם נוכרי לא ימשול למכרה בבגדו בה. So if she's evil, if she's bad in the eyes of her master, in other words, she's now, so I'm an Israelite, I decide to sell my daughter as a concubine to another Israelite. This is what it seems to be speaking about, because the context here is Israelite in slavery, or Israelite in indenture. Indenture? Is that a word? If not, I'll make one up. Indenture to another Israelite. So if her master doesn't like her, asher lo ya'ada, that she was designated for him. So she's now sold as a concubine to another Israelite, and that Israelite doesn't like her. Why? He shall have no power to sell her to a foreign nation, to anyone who's not an Israelite. As a sale, because he was disloyal to her. In other words, you can't just, if you take on an Israelite, as an Israelite female, as a concubine, then you have to treat her well. If you don't like her, if you don't want to keep her in your household, then ostensibly you can get rid of her. You can maybe set her free, or maybe sell her to another Israelite as a concubine, but you cannot sell her to a foreign nation. You have to keep her in Israel. Verse 9. ואם לבנו יעדנה כמשפט הבנות יעשה לה. And if he is if a man, I'll just paraphrase, if a man purchases this Israelite woman, not for himself, but for his son as a concubine, then literally כמשפט הבנות יעשה לה, he shall do to her according to the laws of the daughters. Okay, what does that mean? We're going to find out right now. אם אחרת ייקח לו שאירה כסופה ועונתה לא יגרע. If he takes another, in other words, if he takes another concubine, her food, clothes, and sexual pleasure, he shall not diminish. Okay, in other words, he can't just add her to his harem and then forget about her. Okay, he has to treat her as if he were as if she were a daughter of Israel, and I think that's exactly what this means here. Mishpat banot, ya'asela. Okay. ואם שלוש אלה לא יעשה לה, ויצא חינם אין כסף. And if he does not do these three things for her, then she goes out, she leaves him without any obligation, she owes him no money. Okay? So these laws here are talking about a female slave, female Hebrew slave. So what we see here is a number of interesting things, and then we'll try to get some commentary on it. So we see that the woman herself is not sold into indentured servitude because she owes money. Okay, women in ancient Israel were were basically acted upon. They were not the actors. Yes, there are certainly some exceptions, like the daughters of Tzalafad. You know, there are strong Israelite women, but basically they are part of a household, as I've said many times, their father's household and then their husband's household. So she doesn't owe the money and then is sold in servitude. Her father decides to sell her as a concubine to another Israelite. If that happens, if that other Israelite doesn't like her, then he cannot sell her outside of Israel. The implication being perhaps that he can sell her, but he has to sell her to another Israelite. He can't now turn her into a concubine to someone who's not a Jew, who's not an Israelite. On the other hand, if he purchased her as a concubine for his son, then she's to be treated like a daughter, and maybe a banot, because we have libno, his daughter. Then to his son, then he's treated like a daughter. In other words, he has to treat her like his own daughter or daughter-in-law. And that means that if his son takes on another concubine, then he still has to treat her well. He still has to provide her with all her needs. He cannot. Let's contrast this with, let's say, the book of Esther, where King Achashverosh gathers all the good-looking virgins from around his kingdom and sleeps with them, and then places them into, there were two harems, one waiting to be taken for a test ride by him, and then another harem afterwards where they're placed, and they stay in that harem until and if King Achashverosh calls for them. The implication being that most of those women are just left in the harem for the rest of their lives. They cannot be touched by anyone else because they are now part of the king's harem, but they are never called again by the king after that initial test drive. That was opposed to Esther, who was called by the king and ultimately, according to the book of Esther, made the queen. Okay? So that's what you can't do here. If someone takes on another concubine, another wife, then he cannot just disregard this first wife. He can't just throw her in a harem somewhere and forget about her. He has to give her everything she needs. He has to treat her as an equal wife, essentially. Okay? And if he can't, then she's set free. What we do have here is the idea of a female slave or concubine, very clearly. So here we have a male slave who is sold essentially as an indentured servant. Here we have a female slave who is not sold as an indentured servant, who's sold by her father. Maybe the father needs to make money. To this day, it's very common in third world countries that you can sell your children to other families, maybe families that need farmhands or families that don't have enough children or want more children, and sell them for money, right? So you pump out, 20 children. You can't support them all. You sell some of them off as farmhands or whatever. Okay. Well, that's the case here. It seems this is a daughter is sold off as a concubine to another Israelite, so that the father can perhaps make some money. Self-limited number of wives. Good point, Phil. That if you have to treat each wife, you have to pay attention to each wife, then you can't have 1,000 of them. Okay, let's get a little commentary on that. Let's start with our cultural backgrounds thingy. Get rid of all this. So 21.8. 21.8 is okay. So this is the verse about if her master, if her husband doesn't like her, then he cannot sell her to a foreign nation. Okay, so we're reading here now. This is fun. So it was standard procedure to allow debt slaves to be redeemed. But in this case, the daughter has been sold into debt slavery with the understanding that she will become the concubine of her master, the creditor. If the master makes her his concubine, redemption appears to be disallowed. Right, she's a wife. Why is it resurrected if she displeases him and he decides not to make her his concubine? The Code of Hammurabi, sections 146 to 147, indicates that a slave concubine who bore children had certain protections that ordinary slaves, even debt slaves, did not. If the daughter does not become the master's concubine, she loses the chance to gain these extra protections, and thus the right of redemption is revived. Okay. Well, all right. Let's look at Robert Alter on that one. Okay, so Robert Alter says, from what follows, it is clear that the impoverished father is selling her not to perform labor, as is the case of the male slave, but as some sort of concubine. It is for this reason that the conditions of her manumission differ from those of the male slave. If she seems bad in the eyes of the master, that is, if he finds anything about her that disinclines him to keep her as a sexual partner, or maybe just as a wife, maybe she's hot, but a real pain in the ass. The Hebrew Amnochri, so to an outsider, Amnochri elsewhere would mean a foreign people, is probably an archaic social term, another reflection of the ancient character of the document, with Am meaning kin. So he says, that's interesting. So he says that it doesn't mean a non-Israelite, that if the master doesn't like the concubine, he can't sell her. I translated it as can't sell her to a foreign nation. I think that's what it means, honestly. I have to disagree with him on this one, but let's at least see what he says. He says it means an outsider, so meaning someone who's not her kin. That's pushing it a little bit. And broken faith with her, literally betrayed her. He has not honored his commitment to keep her as a concubine. That's this over here. Okay, so we can't do that. Bibirdo, because he betrayed her. Okay. Okay. And if he again purchases her for his son, and the son takes on a second concubine, then he must treat her like an Israelite daughter, like his own daughter or daughter-in-law, and his son cannot reduce her wardrobe, her meals, wardrobe, and conjugal rights. Let's read this. Although the translation reflects a strong consensus of Hebrew commentators, the term onah is much in dispute. Right. So again, it should be pointed out that that's really a rabbinical translation, that the third thing means reduce her sexual, her conjugal rights, as he said. Since the masters rejected the woman as a bedmate, it does seem odd to require him to make conjugal visits. Some have interpreted the term as housing by relating it to ma'on, habitation, others noting a husband's threefold obligation in other ancient Near Eastern documents to provide his wife with food, clothing, and oil or unguents. Propose that onah refers to such cosmetic necessities, although the philological grounds for that claim are uncertain. I guess what we can glean from this is that it's not really clear that this third thing that he can't reduce is her conjugal rights. Okay. Let's move on. So that's that. Now we go to another topic. So makeh ish wameth mot yumat. So he who strikes a man and he dies shall be put to death. He himself shall be put to death. So that's murder, right? If you murder, you are put to death. Verse 13. Wa'sher lo sada wa Elohim ina li'yado usamti lecha makom asher yanus shama. So this is intentional murder. This is premeditated murder. Okay? And this is manslaughter. Washer lo tzada, so literally didn't hunt him down. So that translate here. Didn't lie in wait. Well, Elohim ina liado, and God made it or brought it into his hands. In other words, God made it happen. It was from the hand of God. I will make for you a place to where he can flee. And that's, we will see later. These are the idea of the Levitical cities. And I'm sure, let's see, I'm sure it's going to point to it. Right, Leviticus 24. Let's look very briefly at Leviticus 24. Where is it? No, it's not Leviticus 24. So where is it? One second. Numbers 35, maybe. Numbers 35. Yeah. I'm looking for one specific verse. It's a refuge. One second. Okay, that's not the verse I'm looking for. And I got to take a little break for 5 minutes. Anyway, let me put up some music. And I'm going to take a quick break. I got to plug in. And let's return in about 5 or 10 minutes. Okay?
צלול כיין וריח אורנים נישא ברוח הערביים עם כל פעמונים ובתרדמת אילן ואבן שבויה בחלומה העיר אשר בדד יושבת ובליבה חומה ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור איך יבשו בורות המים כיכר השוק ריקה ואין פוקדת הר הבית בעיר העתיקה ובמערות אשר בסלע והלילות רוחות ואין יורד אל ים המלח בדרך יריחו ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור אך בבואי היום לשיר לך ולך לקשור כתרים חתומתי מצעיר בנייך ומאחרון המשוררים כשמך צורב את השפתיים כי נשיקת זרב אם אשכחך ירושלים אשר כולה זהב ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור
הייתי בפריז וגם ברומא, ראיתי את שבעת פלאי תבל, בקוטב הצפוני וגם דרומה, אך אין מקום כמו ארץ ישראל. וכמו גלויות של נוף יפות, תמונות בזיכרוני עפות, כמו בעד עדשה של מצלמה. בתרמילי אותן אסע לכל מקום בכל מסע, קטעי פסיפס מתוך תמונה שלמה. שלום לך ארץ נהדרת, עבדך דל נושא לך שיר מזמור, גם אם לעתים נודד אני על דרך, בטוב לנדוד אך טוב יותר לחזור. צריכי המגדלים בירושלים, בסמטאות השוק הצבעוני, גגות הרעפים של גבעתיים, הניבטים מבעד חלוני. את האביב בתל אביב, את סבתי ואת סבי, את החלה ואת נרות שבת, את ים המלח מול אדום ואשת לוט צופה לסדום, ואת הקיץ אורחה אילת. שלום לך ארץ נהדרת, עבדך דל נושא לך שיר מזמור, גם אם לעתים נודד אני על דרך, מה טוב לנדוד אך טוב יותר לחזור. מימיה הכחולים של הכנרת והרקיע התואם מעט, והרגשת הבית המוכרת בתוך אורכי זורמת כמו חשמל. הרי גליל והשומרון, הפרדסים שבשרון, וילדים בגן המושבה, את הכרמל ואת הים, אחד אחד ואת כולם, תמיד קורצים אומרים ברוך הבא. שלום לך ארץ נהדרת, עבדך דל נושא לך שיר מזמור, גם אם לעתים נודד אני על דרך, מה טוב לנדוד אך טוב יותר לחזור.
ועל העוקץ, על המר והמתוק, על ביתנו התינוקת שמורי לי הטוב, על האש המבוערת, על המים הזכים, על האיש השב הביתה מן המרחקים, על כל אלה, על כל אלה שכון לי, אלי הטוב, על הדבש ועל העוקץ, על המר והמתוק, על נטע קור נטוע, על תשכח את התקווה, השיבני ואשובה אל הארץ הטובה. שמורי לי על זה הבית, על הגן, על החומה, מיגון, מפחד פתע וממלחמה. שמור על המעט שיש לי, על האור ועל הטף, על הפרי שלא הבשיל עוד בשמש.
Okay, welcome back. That's the music. Okay, so we are back. We are in Exodus chapter 21. And we saw this law regarding intentional murder, premeditated murder, versus manslaughter. Now, I'm just doing some out loud thinking here, as I always do. But let's see if we can find if a man did not eat him yesterday and the day before. Deuteronomy 19:4. All right, so let's look at Deuteronomy 19:4. First of all, let me just make sure. Okay, so that's good. Present your screen. Window. Streamyard. Share. Shabbat Shalom, Yoshi Ben. Okay, so we're going to look now at, what did we say? Hey, what happened to it? Deuteronomy 19. So again, just to make it go a little bit quickly, I will read the English version. Okay, so Deuteronomy 19, cities of refuge. When the Lord your God has destroyed the nation whose land he has given you, and when you have driven them out and settled in their towns and houses, then set aside for yourselves 3 cities in the land the Lord your God is giving you to possess. Determine the distances involved. I'm going to skip a little bit. So that a person who kills someone may flee for refuge to one of these cities. This is the rule concerning anyone who kills a person and flees there for safety. Anyone who kills a neighbor unintentionally without malice aforethought. We'll look at that in the Hebrew in a second. For instance, a man may go into the forest with his neighbor to cut wood, and as he swings his axe to fell a tree, the head may fly off and hit his neighbor and kill him. That man may flee to one of these cities and save his life. Otherwise, the avenger of blood might pursue him in a rage, overtake him if the distance is not too great, and kill him, even though he's not deserving of death, since he did this to his neighbor without malice aforethought. Okay, so we have a distinction between, well, there are 2 things. Okay, let's look at it in the Hebrew for a second. Open that up in a new tab. So literally it says here, I'm going to translate verse 4. This is Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 4. So this is the matter of a murderer. Asher Yanus Shama Uhai, who shall flee there and live. Asher Yaket Re'eh, who killed his fellow man bivli da'at, without intention. Uhulo sonelo mitmon shishom, and he did not. It says literally he did not hate him yesterday or the day before. In other words, and they translate that into English here, or the NIV translates it as did not have, or without malice aforethought. So in other words, this was not intentional murder. This is manslaughter. And the example they give, and I can go back to the English for this one, is, where is it? For instance, a man may go into the forest with his neighbor to cut wood, and as he swings his axe to fell a tree, the head may fly off and hit his neighbor and kill him. So this is speaking about, I am not an expert I'm not a lawyer, but manslaughter, or maybe negligent manslaughter. Maybe the person was not careful to prepare his axe. He knew the handle was loose, or he didn't, thought maybe the handle was loose and didn't fix it. But the point is, he did not intend to kill him. This here, if we use the Hebrew, where is it? Right. So it doesn't say it here, but if someone does intentionally, in other words, if someone did do it out of hatred, and the phrase here is "Ulosone lo mitmol shishomi," did not hate him yesterday and the day before, meaning he didn't intentionally murder him. He didn't plan the murder. So that's first degree murder, is if you intentionally plan the murder. Now, in American jurisprudence, and again, I don't claim to be an expert, but from my layman's knowledge of American jurisprudence, there's second degree murder. The example they give of second degree murder is that a man walks in to his home and sees his wife in bed with another man, and in a fit of rage, kills that man. So that's not premeditated. That's he just lost control in the heat of the moment and killed the man. So the question for me is, where does second degree murder fall, right? Because he didn't hate the man. It wasn't premeditated murder. He didn't, and we're talking about an innocent person. He didn't, plot a murder against this person. And maybe the example of a man in bed with a woman is not a good example, because there the man really is doing something deserving of death. Let's give the example of, I don't know, his neighbor, never picks up the dog poop on the curb, and this neighbor decides, to plot murder against him because he's sick of seeing the dog poop on the curb. Okay, so that is a person that's not deserving of being killed, and this other person kills him and plans it out. That's premeditated murder. That's first degree murder. Second degree murder is he comes home and the dog is pooping on his neighbor, on his front door, and then he loses control and kills the neighbor even though he never intended to. That's second degree murder. And then manslaughter, I don't think there is such a thing as third degree murder in American jurisprudence. And then manslaughter are these examples, right, where there was no intention of killing another person. And then there's negligent manslaughter, like let's say you knew your brakes were, not good on your car, and you didn't have them checked, and then you plow into a family of 5, then that would be negligent manslaughter. And then manslaughter is you just slam on the brakes and suddenly they're not working, and you kill the family, right? So there's a distinction. So, okay, so those 4 levels of killing another person: first degree murder, second degree murder, negligent manslaughter, and just manslaughter. It would seem, maybe I'd always thought that in the past that second degree murder would go into the category where you can flee to the city of refuge, but now I'm reading it, and for the first time I don't think that's true, even though it really only mentions 2 of the 4. This is first degree murder and this is manslaughter, which could be negligent or non-negligent manslaughter. I'd always lumped second degree murder, meaning heat of the moment murder, into the second category, or into the category where the murderer could flee to a city of refuge because he didn't hate the person yesterday and the day before. But in thinking about it again, I think that second degree manslaughter might actually be lumped into the first category, where the person is put to death because it wasn't a situation where it was done by accident, negligent or not. It was a situation where it was done on purpose. So maybe that's the distinction. I'm just thinking out loud. Okay? So at any rate, let's go with that. So we have going back to Exodus 21. So first and second degree murder, the murderer is put to death. Manslaughter, negligent or otherwise, then cities are set up, or places are set up where the manslaughterer can flee. And as we see in Deuteronomy 19, if he doesn't flee, the avenger of blood might pursue him in a rage, overtake him if the distance is too great, and kill him. even though he's not deserving of death. So what the heck does that mean? Okay, it's natural. Well, I always tell the story. This is a true story of a scumbag known as John Gotti, who lived in Queens, where I grew up, a very different part of Queens, but still in Queens, New York, where I grew up. And apparently, he had a next door neighbor who had nothing to do with was not a mafia guy at all. But one day, this next door neighbor, completely by mistake, I think, I don't remember the exact circumstances, but he ran over John Gotti's son and killed him. In fact, let's even find that story. Neighbor kills John Gotti's son. So after a neighbor named John Favara accidentally ran over Frank Gotti, the middle son of mafia boss John Gotti, the man vanished forever without a trace. Okay, so we get the idea. Okay, so this was an accident. So what category does it fit into? It fits into the category of verse 13. He didn't have any malice. He didn't have any negative intentions towards this. I think it was a child. This child, it was just a complete accident. And yet, John Gotti ostensibly had this person killed. Okay, that's an example of what we see regarding in Deuteronomy 19, the avenger of blood. Even though it was a complete accident, the bereaved relatives or the bereaved family might still want to take revenge on this person. We see this a lot in news stories in the United States and I guess elsewhere, where it's an accident, and then the family comes in and very upset. Obviously, they're grieving. They want the judge to throw the book at the person who killed their relatives, or their relative, or their family member, and usually the judge doesn't, but sometimes does. America is a very evil place, and judges do not really adjudicate correctly. But hopefully, a wise judge would say, "Yes, I understand the family would like to take revenge. They missed their family member horribly, but this person had no negative intentions. It was a complete accident, and therefore should not have the book thrown at him." So what we see here are examples of that case that is being spoken about in Exodus 21:12 through 13, or in 13, where it was an accident, but it's going to be natural. The bereaved family is maybe still going to want to take revenge on the person who killed their family member. And it's not right. He doesn't deserve it. Again, we read in the English here, okay? Deuteronomy 19:6. Otherwise, the avenger of blood might pursue him in a rage, overtake him if the distance is not too great, and kill him, even though he's not deserving of death, since he did it to his neighbor without malice aforethought. This is why I command you to set aside for yourselves 3 cities. So cities of refuge in ancient Israel was set aside, and then they were expanded beyond the 3. But cities of refuge were set aside in ancient Israel for exactly this case. So again, to go back to the example of this scumbag, John Gotti, who had his neighbor killed, if this were ancient Israelite law, that neighbor at that point could have fled to a city of refuge, and he would have been protected there. And then since he doesn't deserve to die, it was a complete accident, then the avenger of blood, John Gotti, in the example we are giving, could not have taken revenge on this person, even though he might have wanted to. Okay, that's what we're speaking. Verse 14. This is Exodus 21:14. V'chi yaziv ish al re'ehu lehargo be'arma ma'im mizbachit tikahenu lamut. And if a man should plot against his fellow man to kill him, be'arma, by laying in wait. Here they translate as treachery. Ma'im mizbachit tikahenu lamut. You shall take him from my altar to die. In other words, even if he's holding on to the horns of the altar, and I'll give an example of where that happened. he should be put to death. So then we have another question. Is this just a reiteration of 12, or is this speaking about premeditated murder? In other words, first-degree murder? Is this second-degree murder? Right? Anyone who kills another man? I think this is an introductory sentence, to be honest. Then this gives the manslaughter, and then by contrast, this gives first and maybe first-degree murder. So maybe this is a general sentence about first and second-degree murder. This is manslaughter, and then this is clearly first-degree murder because he plotted against the person to kill him. Okay? That's what I think. Let's see if we can get a little commentary. Close this out. So, Hugh strikes a man. Casuto notes a general structural parallel to the Decalogue. The list of laws begins with the regulations about. Okay, we don't need to go. That's okay. The presupposition for this institution of places of sanctuary for people who have committed involuntary manslaughter is vendetta justice. The members of family bent on redeeming the blood of their dead kinsmen, even if the killing was unintended, would not be permitted to penetrate these towns of refuge. Eventually, the state took over all functions of executing justice, and these provisions became anachronistic. I'm not sure that that's the case. But at any rate, it was accepted or was expected that the family members might want to take revenge. From my altar you shall take it, and as in other cultures, the altar was a place of sanctuary, and someone accused of blood guilt could flee to the altar and cling to one of the carved horns of its corners in a plea to be held free of harm. And this is the story I wanted to go into with Joab. Joab does in 1 Kings 2 in an effort to escape Solomon's henchmen. Solomon orders him to be taken from the altar and executed, perhaps in accordance with this law, for Joab has killed 2 commanders of Israel in cold blood. So this will give us an excuse. My voice is still not 100%, although, and thank you, all of you, for your well wishes. Yes, I had the flu, or maybe it was COVID. I don't know what the hell it was. I don't care what it was, but it was really, really, really unpleasant for a couple of weeks. And now I'm just about 100% better, maybe just a slight lingering of cough and a little bit of, a phlegm, but that's about it. But, as you know, I didn't do the Torah study. I think it was for 3 weeks. And it was really, really an unpleasant couple of weeks, but now we're back. Okay, so let's use this as an excuse to delve into the, oh shoot, we're freezing up. If we are, I'm gonna cut this out. I don't know what's going on here. Are we freezing? Freezing, we're freezing. Okay, so I'm quitting this. I'll come back in. Okay, I think we're back. Sound check, are we back? Can you guys hear me? Somebody give me a yes. Yes. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Can you guys hear me? Okay, good. Okay, so, oops. Let's share the screen again. Okay, so Right. So what were we doing again? We were going to go to the story about Yoav and Solomon. So let me go back to where we were here. By the way, I'd like to give you guys a nice little challenge. What I started doing, I guess about a couple of weeks ago when I was sick, is, I'm always reading the Tanakh, studying the Tanakh, et cetera, et cetera. Well, but I decided recently that I'm going to go through every single book of the Tanakh by listening to it in English. And you could find it on YouTube. So you could find, if you type in, for instance, let's say you want to listen to a book of the Tanakh, Ezekiel, if you type in NIV Ezekiel into YouTube, I'm just giving you an example, whatever book you want to listen to, then you will find on YouTube that in English will be the entire book of that Tanakh that you can listen to in the car, when you go to bed, when you're, I don't know, feeding your chickens, whatever. So I challenge you all to do that, to go through all of the books of the Tanakh by listening to it in your free time. And it's something that I started taking upon myself. And I plan to go through all of the books of the Tanakh and then start again and just keep on doing it. Okay, so that being said, so where were we? 13. Right, so this is 1 Kings 2. So let's go to 1 Kings 2 for a second. Give us an excuse to take a break from the Torah, from the 5 books of Moses, and to delve a little bit into the Nevi'im, the prophets. So, chapter 2. So I'll do a little bit in English and then we'll switch over to Hebrew. Just make sure it's visible there. Yes, it is. All right. So this is after this is right about when King David is on his deathbed. When the time drew near for David to die, he gave a charge to Solomon his son. I'm about to go the way of all the earth, he said. So be strong, act like a man, and observe what Yahweh your God requires. Walk in obedience to him and keep his decrees and commands, his laws and regulations, as written in the law of Moses. Do this so that you may prosper in all you do and wherever you go, and that Yahweh may keep his promise to me. If your descendants watch how they live, and if they walk faithfully before me with all their heart and soul, you will never fail to have a successor on the throne of Israel. So David is worried about his dynasty. He wants Solomon to follow in his ways and keep the commandments of Yahweh so that the dynasty will continue. As we know, the dynasty did continue in southern Israel, pretty much straight through to the exile by Babylon. But northern Israel, after the death of Solomon, broke off into its own kingdom and was led by a king named Yerovam. Eventually, that dynasty switched and became the dynasty of Omri, who was the father of Ahab, and then eventually, then there was a lot of turnover, and eventually the Assyrians exiled or destroyed the northern kingdom. However, so getting back to this, in 1 Kings 2:5, now you yourself, this is David speaking to his son Solomon, now you yourself know what Joab, the son of Zeruiah, did to me, what he did to the 2 commanders of Israel's army, Avner, the son of Ner, and Amasa, the son of Yether. He killed them, shedding their blood in peacetime as if in battle. And with that blood, he stained the belt around his waist and the sandals on his feet. And we could, if we have time, maybe we'll go back and look at that. Deal with him according to your wisdom, but do not let his gray head go down to the grave in peace. And then he goes on and gives instructions to his son regarding how to deal with some other people, some for good and some for bad. So then let's see if I can find it now. Okay. So here we go. So Yoav, who was the commander of the army under David and was kind of a problematic guy. And this is what we're talking about. So basically, Solomon says, you know what to do with Yoav, the son of Tzruya. Okay, deal with him according to your wisdom, but do not let his great head go down into the grave in peace. So he killed 2 innocent men. There's stories of him killing Avner ben Ner and Amasa, the son of Yeter. We can look at those stories, but let's just move on. 2, and now we'll switch over to the Hebrew. And this is 1 Kings 2:28. Let me switch over to the Hebrew. Okay, so as you can see by the title here, the execution of Yoav. So now David instructed his son Solomon, after David dies, to take revenge on Yoav for killing 2 innocent people. Verse 28, just make sure this is showing up here. Very good for you, Desiree Logan. If you can listen to the Hebrew, that's wonderful. Are you fluent in Hebrew? In biblical Hebrew? Okay. So verse 28, Hashmu'a ba'a ad Yoav. So this news or this rumor came to Yoav. Yoav nata אחרי אדוניה ואחרי אבשלום לא נטע וינס יואב אל אוהל יהוה חזק בקרנות המזבח. So Yoav had turned away after Adoniah and after Avshalom, but after Avshalom he did not turn away. So Adoniah, okay, this is getting a bit complicated. It doesn't matter. Adoniah was also the son of David, and he wanted to be king, even though David had slated Solomon to be king. So Yoav eventually did not support Adoniah, but he did support Avshalom when Avshalom rebelled against his father David. Uyanas, but that's irrelevant to the story here. Uyanas Yoav el Ohel Yahweh. So Yoav fled to the tent of Yahweh. What does it mean, the tent of Yahweh? It means the tabernacle. Okay? Where was the tabernacle? The tabernacle was already in Jerusalem, but the temple had not yet been built because Solomon is going to build the temple. And he seized or grabbed onto the horns of the altar. So Yoav finds out that Solomon is out to kill him because that was the instruction given to him by his father David. And so Yoav goes to the tabernacle and grabs onto the horns of the altar. Okay? Now that gives us a little bit more insight into what this means. Okay? If a man should plot against his fellow man to kill him, in other words, if he should plot to murder him, be'arma, deceitfully, even from my altar, you shall take him to put him to death. Okay? That exactly is the case here with Yoav. So Yoav does this thing, which, as Robert Alter mentioned, it was common in ancient times to hold on to the sanctuary was considered, or I should say, how can we say this? How do you say mikdash again in English? They call it sanctuary, right? Mikdash, holy sanctuaries. Okay, yeah. So the sanctuary was considered a sanctuary. That's what they call a sanctuary, like sanctuary city, right? Even I think in much later times, I guess in Europe, people would run to churches as sanctuaries, right? The authorities would leave a person alone if they ran to a church. And even I think in this day and age, people run to churches, during time of war because they're hoping the enemies will not bomb the churches. They use it as a place of sanctuary. So this idea goes back to ancient times where people would go to the sanctuary of their gods and hold on to the horns of the altar, or hold on to the altar of their god, and that would act as a sanctuary, as a sanctuary. Now, the word sanctuary doesn't mean what it means today. A sanctuary is a place of refuge, but sanctuary really means a mikdash. Mikdash is often what the tabernacle or the holy temple are called, from the underlying root kodesh, which means holy, right? So a mikdash is a place of holiness, or a sanctuary, right? Sanctuary, like sanctity, like saint, like right? It's from that same English or from that same Latin root. Okay, so but because these places, because the places of the central places of worship were used in this manner, where people would go there to flee from persecution by whoever. Where they would be safe. So the word sanctuary came to mean a place of refuge. So today we have sanctuary cities. They're definitely not holy cities. New York is definitely not a holy city. It's basically a modern day Sodom and Gomorrah. And if it doesn't repent, will probably be finished off at some time in the relatively near future. It will go the way of Nineveh or ancient Rome, or God knows whatever other cities. But at any rate, this is the idea, and we see this is what Yoav does. He knows that there's a fatwa out against him. He knows there's a vendetta against him, and so he goes to the tent of Yahweh and he grabs onto the altar. Wayugad la Melech Shlomo hinas Yoav el ohel Yahweh, and it was told to King Solomon that Yoav had fled to the ohel Yahweh, to the tent of Yahweh, to the tabernacle, in other words. Wahine etzel mizbeach, and he was holding on to the altar. Literally, he was adjacent to the altar. Waishlach Shlomo et Benayahu ben Yehodaya, and so Shlomo sent Benayahu, the son of Yehodaya. And believe me, you don't want this guy to be sent after you. This guy was basically David's hitman. He actually ended up, when Yoav was deposed from the army of David, he ended up, was it in the time of David or in Solomon? I think, no, Benayahu ended up being the head of the army under, I think it was under Solomon. Maybe it was already under David. Let's look it up for a second. Yeah, one of David's captains and heroes. Okay, at any rate, Lemor lech begabo. So now Solomon instructs Benayahu to kill him. Okay, go and begabo, literally kill him. Well, bega means like to harm him, but the implication here is kill. It wayavo Benayahu el ohel Yahweh, and Benayahu came to the tent of Yahweh. Why? Yomer Elau, and he said to him, Ko Amar Hamelech, say. And he said to him, in other words, Benayahu said to Yoav ben Sruya, Ko Amar Hamelech, so says the king, say, go out, get out of here, okay, go outside. Yomer Lo, Po Amut, and he said, no, but I will die here. Wayeshev Benayahu et Hamelech Devar. And Benayahu returned word to King Solomon, to the king, saying, Lemor, ko diber Yoav, v'cho anani. So he said, this is what Yoav said, and And what should I say to him? What should I answer him? Verse 31, Wayomer lo hamelech, and the king said to him, in other words, King Solomon said to Binayahu, Aseh kasher diber, do as he says, Urabo kvarto, and kill him and bury him. Wa hasirota deme hinam, asher shafach Yoav me'alai wa me'al beit avi. So kill him and bury him. Wasiroti demei chinam, and you will remove demei chinam, literally free or unwarranted spilling of blood. Let's translate it that way. Asher shafach, the blood that he unwarrantedly spilled, that Yoav unwarrantedly spilled, me'alai, from before me, or me'al beit avi, and from before the house of my father. So Yoav says back to Binayahu, I will not go out from the altar, kipo amut, but I'll die here. And basically Shlomo says, okay, as you wish. Verse 32. This is 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 32. Waishiv Yahweh et damo al rosho. And may Yahweh return his blood upon his head. This is a common phrase throughout the Tanakh. Damcha al roshcha, your blood is on your own head. In other words, this is not Solomon's fault or David's fault or Binayahu's fault that you're being put to death. You brought this upon yourself. You spilled innocent blood, and now this blood that you spilled is returning to you. It's on your head. It's on your doing. Asher paga b'shnei anashim tzadikim, because you killed two innocent people or two righteous people, two good and righteous people. Anashim tzadikim v'tovim mimenu. Because he killed, because he killed two righteous and good people who were more righteous and good than he was. We are game, and he killed them with his sword. Avi David lo yada et Avner ben Ner sar tzva Yisrael with Amasa ben Yeter sar tzva Yehuda. And my father David did not know or did not have any problems with Avner ben Ner, the head of the armies of Israel, with Amasa ben Yeter sar tzva Yehuda, and Amasa, the son of Yeter, the head of the armies of Judah. Verse 33, Ushavu demeam berosh Yoav, and you shall return their blood upon the head of Yoav, uberosh Zaro, and on the head of his seed, be'olam, forever. Ule David ule Zaro ule beito ule kiso yesh shalom ad olam me'im Yahweh. And for David and his seed and his house and his dynasty, literally his throne, may there be peace forever from Yahweh. Verse 34. So that's what Solomon says to Yoav, basically, go kill him and bring his blood back upon him. And in shedding this, in avenging Yoav, you will take the blood off of me, Solomon says, my father's house, and my father's dynasty. Okay. Verse 34, we al Binayahu ben Yehodaya. So Binayahu, the son of Yehodaya, went back up, meaning up onto the Temple Mount, wa yifgabo, and killed him, wa yamite, or I should say struck him, yamitehu, and killed him, yikaber bebeito ba midbar, and he was buried in his house in the desert or the wilderness. Verse 35, V'yiten Melech et Binayahu ben Yehodaya tachtav al tzava. Here it is. So this is what I was referring to. So the king made Binayahu, the son of Yehodaya, a tachtav, in place of him, in other words, in place of Yoav ben Tzruya al tzava, over the army. Wa'et Sadok Kohen Natan HaMelech tachat Evyatar. And he placed Sadok the Kohen, and that is very possibly where you get the Sadducees from in Hebrew, the Tzdukim. So he placed Sadok the Kohen, Ve'et Sadok Kohen Natan HaMelech tachat Evyatar. So he placed him in place of Evyatar. So in other words, Solomon, after he kills Yoav, makes Binayahu, the person who just killed Yoav, the head of the army, and he gets rid of Evyatar and makes Tzadok the high priest. Okay, so that is that story. Okay, very good for you. That's right. So that is that story, and that of course relates back to Exodus 21 here, where if someone is guilty of premeditated murder of an innocent person, well, murder implies already of an innocent person, premeditated killing of an innocent person, then even if he holds on to the horns of the altar of Yahweh, then he's to be dragged out of there and put to death. Okay, and that's exactly what happened in the case of Benaiah ben Yehodaya killing Yoav ben Tzruya, the son of Tzruya. Okay, any questions, any comments? Anybody? All right. Let's go on. So we've been going at it for 2.5 hours. I guess we'll stop in maybe about another hour or so. We're not going to get through all of this for sure. And let's see, where do we have to go up to? $24.18. That's a lot. So let's see. Property laws, laws of social responsibility, justice and mercy, Sabbath laws. So maybe I should switch into express mode. I think so. So we can get through it. So let me go back to 21. So we'll switch into what I like to call express mode, where I will read and translate and try to give minimal commentary. Although I'm not always able to do it, but let's give it a shot. So we're now in Exodus 21:15. Anyone who strikes his mother and his father shall be put to death. Commentary? Oh, what happened? Oops. Okay. Verse 17, and anyone who curses his mother and his father shall be put to death. So if you, oh, I'm sorry, skipped one. Anyone who kidnaps a man and sells him, and he is found in his hand, motimat, shall be put to death. Well, there's a lot to say there, but again, I want to go into express mode. So kidnapping is punishable by death if you sell him. Kidnapping for profit is punishable by death. Anyone who curses his mother or his father shall be put to death. And that probably means using the name of God, the explicit name of God, to curse his mother or his father. So if men get into a fight, and one man strikes his fellow man with a stone or with his fist, and he doesn't die, but he becomes temporarily bedridden. In other words, he has to he puts him in the hospital. They get into a bar fight, and one guy puts the other guy in the hospital, basically is what it's saying. Let's put it in modern terms. Im yakum v'hit halech b'chutz al mish'amto v'nikah hamakeh v'nikah hamakeh rak shivto yiten v'rapo yirapeh. So if this person who was put in the hospital by the other guy gets up and walks around outside on his mish'anto, literally his leaning staff. Let's see, what's a better translation for that? His staff, but it means the staff that he leans on, so his cane basically. Wanikach hamakeh rak shivto, Okay, when nikah makeh. So if he hospitalizes him, but he gets better, basically. When nikah makeh, in other words, the one who struck him is held innocent. In other words, he's not charged with murder. For obvious reasons, he didn't die. Rak shifto iten rapo yirapeh. So shifto, from the same word as well, it could be from one of two words. Let me just look it up. Mm-hmm. So it's not from Shabbat, right? So it's from his cessation. Well, then that would imply Shabbat. Cease. Yeah. Okay. So they're relating it at least here to Shabbat. Okay. So basically, his time lost. So let's say all the money that he lost from not being able to work, not being able to, do whatever he usually did. I forgot what they call that in English. Basically, let's say he was out of work for a month. So you have to pay his salary for a month. Okay. And also that required and also his doctor's bills. So you have to pay his time lost and his doctor bills. That's basically what it says. Okay. And of course, this, again, I just want to point out that these are guidelines, just like the Constitution is a guideline, but out of it grows, an entire body of law. That's why in the American government, you have the legislative branch, the executive branch, the judiciary, and you have the Constitution. Just as the written Constitution of the United States is not enough to run the country on a day-to-day basis, so the written Torah is not enough to run the country on a day-to-day basis. And this is, I think, to get off into a little bit of a tangent, this is, I think, what most people don't understand about Karaism, and also what many Karaites don't understand. And I'll give you an example. I was with a Karaite many years ago when I first got into Karaism, and he said that because it doesn't say anything about red lights in the Torah, that you have to stop at a red light, that he has no obligation to stop at a red light. Tell it to the judge. So that's an example of taking Karaism. I assume the person has become a little bit more wise and mature since then, but that's what he told me at the time. So that's an example of taking Karaism to an extreme, saying, I will only keep the laws that are in the written Torah. Okay. On the other hand, you can go to the other extreme and you can create a completely new religion, a derivative religion, a reformed Judaism, as I like to call it, like the Pharisees did, which is so divergent from what I, with my common sense, and I would imagine many other Karaites, see as the straightforward understanding of the laws, that it becomes basically a different religion. Okay? So where do I stand? I stand somewhere in the middle. Okay? And let me explain what I mean. It's clear that the written Torah is not enough to run a nation on a day-to-day basis. We saw in last week's Parsha that Moses was to seek out men of valor, God-fearing men, wise men, God-fearing men, and men who hate corruption, and make them judges. So if you have wise people, then they will be able to understand, they will be able to internalize the written Torah and use that as a way to adjudicate cases and to run the nation in correct way. Of course, ultimately and ideally, there should be a prophet at the head of this hierarchy of judges, where if the cases are too difficult, then God can be consulted. That's exactly the advice that Jethro gives to Moses in in Exodus 18, I believe it is. And so that's the way I understand it. Now, can you call this an oral law? Not really. Okay. And again, I point you to this article that I mentioned before on Karaite Insights, called I forgot what it's called again. Let me bring it up one more time. Yeah, was there a Pharisaic revolution against the old order? So I point you to this article. Okay, it's under, if you go to Karaite Insights and then go to the library section, you'll see it. And essentially what this guy argues is there's no such thing as an oral law, because precedents made by one judge do not now constitute a new law, and there's also no legislative body in the conception of the Torah. There's only judges. Okay. Now there may be a legislative body like to say, okay, you have to stop at red lights and go at green lights, but that's not really Torah related, right? So the point being that what a judge is supposed to do is supposed to internalize the written Torah, and that's supposed to serve as a guideline to adjudicate cases. Just as, to give the analogy of the Constitution, you can have the what do they call them again? The constitutionalists, those who want to stick closer to the original meaning of the Constitution, and then those who basically see the Constitution just as a starting point, but then the nation can wander in any direction it wants from there. Basically, they see the written Constitution of the United States as an obsolete document that's not relevant anymore. It may have been relevant back in the 1700s, but it's not relevant anymore. On the other hand, you have they're called constitutionalists, we'll call them, who believe that the written Constitution of the United States is the founding document of the United States of America and needs to be adhered to as closely as possible. Of course, it doesn't mean every single word in the Constitution is relevant today, but in general, we should stick more or less to the original intent of the founding fathers. That would be the difference, in my eyes, between Karaism, which would be the constitutionalist point of view, and rabbinical Judaism would be what I will call the liberal point of view. The rabbis, whether they'll admit it or not, basically say that the written Torah has no relevance. It may have been a starting point thousands of years ago, but we can wander off of it in any way we see fit, and we don't have to attempt to stick as closely as possible to the original intention of the Torah. And the smarter ones will admit this outright. This rabbi that I learned with, who I've mentioned a bunch of times, I won't even mention his name again, before I became a Karaite, basically said the oral law is a development. Okay, it means that we start with the written law, we start with the ancient law of Moses, but now we can develop over time and wander off in any direction that we see fit. And so that's his justification for what the rabbis did. On the other hand, the Karaites are closer to the constitutionalists, who would say that, yes, times may change, but we are required that the written law has as much relevance today as it did in ancient times, and we are to internalize it and understand it and stick to it as closely as possible. Okay, so that's the difference between the Karaites and the Rabbinites. Now, the Rabbinites like to set up a false dichotomy. Okay, and what is that false dichotomy? They say that the Karaites only adhere to the written law of the Torah, and that is not true. You cannot run a nation on only the written law of the Torah. At least that cannot be all of the legislation and all of the adjudication. It's not possible, because there's no way that a written document, especially as short as the Torah, can encapsulate every single possible case. So that's not what the Torah is meant. The Torah is meant to be, I'm sorry, I was saying what the rabbis would say. So that's what the rabbis would say. As a Karaite, I would say that the Torah is meant to be like the Constitution of the United States, as I mentioned before. You internalize the written laws of the Torah. You hopefully are a person of valor, a wise person, a God-fearing person, and a person who despises corruption. And then you can use the laws that you internalize from the written Torah and from the entire Tanakh, as a matter of fact, and use them to acquire the wisdom and to use your wisdom to adjudicate cases. The rabbis would say, no, that's not the case. We have an oral law. Now, whenever I talk about the rabbinical oral law, I always put it in double quotes, because the idea of an oral law is a lie. You should never, if you want to be a true Karaite, never, ever, ever allow a rabbi to get away with calling rabbinical Judaism the oral law. That is a lie. Okay? There's no oral law that was passed down from the time of Moses. I'll modify that statement a little bit. Okay? A large amount of what became rabbinical Judaism, Pharisaic and later rabbinical Judaism, was not passed down from the time of Moses. Okay? But yet, by the rabbis calling it the oral law, that's what they want to imply. Why do they want to imply it? Because it's not written anywhere. So let's take a standard case of let's take an example of rabbinical Judaism, such as tefillin, okay, phylacteries. You all know what that is. If you don't, show a picture of it. The boxes. There you go. That's your phylacteries. Okay. So the rabbis want to claim that this was passed down, that this was passed down orally from the time of Moses. Okay? They believe that if you go back in time to the time of Moses, Moses was putting on tefillin, Joshua was putting on tefillin, David was putting on tefillin. Okay, so why is it not written down anywhere? Well, they will claim that that Deuteronomy, is it 4:6 or 6:4? 6. Deuteronomy 6:4 is a Shema, that Deuteronomy 6 and other places already imply it. But really what they want to say is that the interpretation of those verses to mean tefillin, to mean phylacteries, was passed down from the time of Moses orally. Okay, that's a load of baloney. It was not. Tefillin arose, the practice of tefillin arose under the rabbis. There's no evidence anywhere of anyone putting on these tefillin before the Pharisees came to power. It was a Pharisaic novelty. It was a Pharisaic invention. Okay? So it's a lie to say it was an oral law passed down from the time of Moses. So why do they call it an oral law? Because they want to sell to the nation of Israel this idea that their interpretations harken all the way back to the time of Moses. Only problem is they're not written down anywhere. There's no evidence that a lot of these laws were kept. Separation of meat and milk. There's no evidence anywhere that this was kept. But there's no written evidence, so they have to say it was passed down orally. So never, ever, ever, as a Karaite, never allow the Rabbinites to get away with calling their interpretations, their body of law, the oral law. It's not the oral law. You should always call it the Pharisaic law or the rabbinical law. Never, ever the oral law. If you call it the oral law, you're buying into their propaganda that it was passed down orally from the time of Moses. Now, the smarter ones, like the last rabbi I learned with before I became a Karaite, know that it's complete BS. The dumber ones believe that all of the stuff was passed down from the time of Moses, or at the very least, what they believe is that the methods for interpretation, what are called the hermeneutical methods for interpretation of the Torah, were passed down from ancient times. Okay, the way to derive halakha from the written Torah was passed down from the time of Moses. Okay, those are the slightly smarter ones. The much smarter ones know that both of those two things, meaning that the actual laws were passed down from the time of Moses, or the methods of interpretation of the Torah were passed down from Moses, don't hold up to scrutiny. So they abandon that point of view, because they know that any thinking person will reject those ideas. And so the smarter ones now will say the oral law, the quote unquote oral law, is a development. In other words, what they're basically saying is that we're not constitutionalists, we are liberalists. We can take the original Torah, the written Torah, as a starting point, and then we can wander off in any direction that the Chachamim, that the wise men see. So we can come up with ideas like tefillin. We can change matrilineal descent to patrilineal descent to matrilineal descent. We can invent a new holiday called Rosh Hashanah and place it in the first day of the 7th month. We can separate milk and meat. And we're allowed to do this not because Moses was doing it, not because David was doing it, and not because Moses passed down ways to do this later, but because we the rabbis have the authority to change the Torah as we see fit. We are the Chachamim, we are the wise men, and we have the Torah to change the Torah as we see fit. It's kind of like so they're kind of like the Kamala Harris's camel-faced Harrises, and I don't know. They're basically the Democrats. The rabbis are basically the Democrats. We can do whatever we want with the written constitution, and we can take it in any direction we want. And it may have been relevant to white heterosexual males in the 1700s, but now our nation has developed from that point. Okay, that is what the rabbis are basically saying. The smarter of the rabbis, the dumb ones don't even say that. Okay, we Karaites are constitutionalists. We're originalists. That's what I think Mark Levine calls it, right? Originalists. We believe that the written law, even though it's 3,000 plus years old, has relevance to this very day. And there might be some things we have to wander from it. And I can give an example such as meat sacrifices, which I think may have been relevant back then, but may not be relevant in the future. I won't get into that. It's a long discussion. Even I know some of the rabbinites, the more forward-thinking rabbinites like the Rambam, even say similar things. But basically, we have to stick to the original laws of the Torah. They are eternal, and we're not allowed to wander from them. Okay? Yes, we're not riding around on donkeys, and we're not plowing with oxen anymore. At least not in most places. But that doesn't give us a right to stray from the original meaning of the Torah. However, so that's what I would say. That is my point of view. Now you have what I'll call the, what shall I call them? Dumb Karaites. I'll call them the less understanding Karaites, who would say something more extreme, that we only can go by the oral law. We cannot adjudicate anything outside of the oral law, and I would disagree with that. So as a Karaite, as what I would like to think, hopefully a more forward-thinking. Now I don't like to use the word forward-thinking. A more, understanding Karaite, I'll say. I understand that you cannot run the nation of Israel according to just the written Torah. That what you have to do is become an expert in the written Torah, internalize the laws, the lessons that the written Torah is trying to tell you, and then try as best as you can to take on those qualities that Jethro recommended to Moses in Exodus 18, to be a good judge, which is to be a man of valor, or an honorable person, a wise person, a God-fearing person, and a person who hates corruption. And then hopefully you can use your understanding of the written Torah plus those four qualities to be able to come up with a normal, natural way to adjudicate cases based on the written law. Okay, I always like to give the example of King Solomon. King Solomon, after he rose to power, we have the famous example of the two prostitutes who came to Solomon, each claiming that the dead child is the other one's and the live child is theirs. And then Solomon, he doesn't use the written Torah. He doesn't use the so-called oral Torah. He just uses his wisdom to come up with a way to find out who the baby belongs to. Right? Holds the baby up, says he's going to cut the baby in half, and that, of course, exposes who the real mother is. Okay, that's the way that Solomon used his wisdom, used his understanding of the written Torah to adjudicate cases. At the end of the day, what is required for adjudicating cases is wisdom, fear of God, being an honorable person, and being a person who hates corruption. That's what's required. The written Torah, when a person like that internalizes the written Torah, then he can start popping out judgments which are in line with the intentions that Yahweh had when he wanted to make us a chosen nation. Okay? I hope that kind of makes sense. Of course, that reminds me of an old joke. It's not my joke. I heard it many years ago in I think in a synagogue somewhere, of the other case that's not spoken about. And apparently this was also in the time of Solomon. Sorry, if you've traveled in Jewish circles, you probably heard this joke a million times, but I still love it. So there's another case not spoken about as much, and it didn't make its way into the Tanakh, about two women who see a very eligible bachelor, and each of them want their daughter to marry this eligible bachelor. So they bring the case to Solomon, and the first potential mother-in-law says, this young man, this eligible young bachelor, belongs to my daughter. My daughter is to marry him. And the second potential mother-in-law says, the eligible young bachelor belongs to my daughter. My daughter is to marry him. And so King Solomon scratches his chin and thinks about it. And he says, aha, this is what I will do. I will take the eligible young bachelor and I will cut him in half. And he lifts his sword to cut the eligible young bachelor in half. And the first mother-in-law says, no, don't cut him. Don't cut him. The other woman's daughter can marry him. Just don't kill him. And the second one says, kill him. Cut him in half. Nobody's going to have him. My daughter can't have him, and nobody's going to have him. And King Solomon thinks about it, and he adjudicates the case, and he says, it's the second woman who said cut him in half, who's the rightful, whose daughter will marry this man because she is the true mother-in-law. Okay. All right. Okie doke. So let's move on here. Okay, verse 20. איש את עבדו או את אמתו בשבט ומת תחת ידו נקום ינקם. So anyone who strikes his slave or his maidservant, his male slave or his female slave with a staff, in other words, beats his slave, and he dies, nakom yinakem. So it doesn't say mot yumat. It doesn't say he shall be put to death. It says nakom yinakem. It shall be avenged, or he shall be avenged. Okay, let's read on a little bit. Ach im yom o yomayim ya'amod lo yukam ki kaspo hu. And if this male or female slave stays alive, basically remains for a day or two, in other words, before dying, then it shall not be avenged because this is his money. I think the implication here is, yes, you are allowed to beat your slaves, okay? But if the slave dies, it's not that you're put to death. It's that there is some kind of adjudication against you. I'm not sure what it is. We can look at some of the opinions. Maybe a monetary adjudication, something else maybe, okay? But you're not put to death for beating your slave to death, okay? And even more so, if the slave survives for a couple of days, then there's no recompense. It says because this is money. So let me explain what's going on here. So let me explain what's not happening, okay? This is not saying that you can beat your slave to death, okay? This is not saying that at all. Because if we're saying that at all, it wouldn't say nakom yinakem. It wouldn't say that some kind of revenge or some kind of recompense. It literally says nakom yinakem. It should be avenged, okay? What it's saying is that if you do beat your slave to death, it's not an automatic death penalty. Maybe the judge will say it's a death penalty. You were cruel to your slave, you killed an innocent person, and now you're put to death, okay? But it doesn't say that, okay? It says that the case should be adjudicated and decided based on the circumstances, but it doesn't necessarily imply the death penalty. Why? Because a master is allowed to beat his slave. That's the way it was in ancient times. You were allowed to discipline your slave. In fact, the head of household is allowed to discipline anyone in his household. His wife, and I mean physically discipline, his wife, his children, his slaves, his maidservants, anyone. That is the right of the head of the household. Now, that doesn't mean that every head of household is going to do that or ever do that, but that's his right. And before you say it's so mean and so cruel, then I would say, look at the government today, okay? Where the head of the household, or look at the Western cultures today. It certainly doesn't apply in Eastern cultures as much, but look at let's say America today. A husband or a father cannot even discipline his children anymore. A husband cannot discipline his wife anymore. And by the way, look up Christian spanking, I think it's called, where there's a certain, I don't know if it's a sect or a certain belief system among Christians that the wives agree to submit to physical discipline from their husbands because they believe that that's the will of God, or they believe that that's what is necessary for them, okay, to stay in line. So in the Torah conception, the head of the household is able to discipline his family members, the members of his household, any way he sees fit, okay? In modern West, you cannot even physically discipline your own children anymore. They can call the cops and you'll get taken away, okay? You certainly can't discipline your wife. You certainly can't discipline your slaves unless, you hide them in the basement somewhere. Which reminds me, I have to let my slaves that are hiding in the basement out. It's been a couple of years. Just a joke. I don't have any slaves in the basement. They're in the attic. So the point being that in the modern West, let's take the example of a child. Okay, you cannot physically discipline your child. Okay. However, a total stranger can physically discipline your child, your wife. There are no slaves today. What does that mean? A police officer, right? If you wise off to your father, he can't even touch you. If you wise off to a police officer, he can beat you practically to death, throw the cuffs on you, drag you down to the station. Okay, so as the Israelite conception is the household, the head of the household is king of his castle, to quote Ralph Cramden from The Honeymooners. Okay. In the modern Western conception, the man has been completely castrated / emasculated. He's no longer head of his household. His power has been ceded to the government, and the government's thugs, in other words, the police, the FBI, whatever the case may be. Okay, so before we go saying that this is so mean and so cruel, then we have to understand it in its context. Okay, the head of the household, the father or the head of the household, had great power. And this is a much better situation than in the modern Western conception, where the head of the household can't even discipline his own children, and instead total strangers, often violent, psychopathic, sociopathic strangers, some of who have PTSD from serving in Afghanistan or Iraq or whatever, and they're complete sociopaths. They can come and discipline your children for the slightest infraction. If you look in some places at a policeman the wrong way, if you wise off, then that policeman can practically beat your child to death. Okay? So before you say this is cruel, then look at the modern Western world and see exactly, or at least the United States of America. I've been in other Western countries and even non-Western countries where the police are actually much more reasonable. In fact, the only country I've ever been in where the police are so violent is the United States of America. Okay? If you go to so-called primitive countries like Morocco or Tunisia, both of which I've been in, the police are actually quite mild, as a matter of fact. And if you go to Western Europe, you barely feel their presence at all. Okay, so anywho, so let's replace this for a second. I said I'd go into express mode, but I guess that ain't gonna happen. So let's replace this with, instead of slave, let's replace this with child. Okay? If you beat your child, your son or your daughter, and he dies, then you should be avenged. Should you be put to death for beating your child, your son or your daughter? Clearly not. Okay, you as the father have the right and even the responsibility to discipline your child. Okay, so say shifto soneh beno, to quote Proverbs. He who hates his son, I'm sorry. Well, they usually translate it as spare the rod, spoil the child, but that's not what it says. It says choseh shifto, he who spares the rod, soneh beno, hates his child. Okay, children need discipline, and sometimes the only language they understand is physical discipline. Okay, so should you be put to death if you discipline your child and he dies? Clearly not, because unless there's something seriously wrong with you, you did not intend to kill your child. Maybe the child had a heart attack or something like that. Okay, so that's the context that's being spoken about here with the slave. Okay, the slave can be disciplined by the master, but there's no intention by the master to kill the slave. It wouldn't make sense, and that's what we see in verse 21. If he lingers for a day or two before dying, in other words, lo yukam, there's no punishment at all, because this is his own money. In other words, you're not going to beat your own slave to death because that's a loss of money for you. Okay, you have a free worker. It's not free. You have to provide for the slave's well-being, but you basically have cheap indentured labor. Why would you? It wouldn't make sense that you would intentionally beat this person to death. Okay. It's kind of like in American slavery. Now, I'm not going to go ahead and defend American slavery of blacks back in the day. But one thing I will say is that this idea that masters were like in Roots, in Roots, Kunta Kinte runs away one too many times, and Master Reynolds cuts his leg off. Does that make any sense? Does that make any sense? Of course not. If you cut your slave's leg off, and I'm not defending slavery of the blacks, it was a mistake to ever bring him to the country in the first place, but I'm not defending slavery of the blacks. All I'm saying is that no master is going to cut his slave's leg off, because that's a loss of money. Now that slave can't go pick the cotton, right? The slave becomes useless. Now you have to support him, right? He didn't kill him. He cut his leg off. Now he has to provide him with food. He has to provide him with shelter, blah, 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 right? So that's his loss of money. It wouldn't make any sense. And that's exactly what's being said here in verse 21, okay? In verse 20 and 21. So if you beat your slave and he dies, then you went a little bit overboard, okay? You're allowed to beat your slave, okay? But you did it too much, and now that's brought to the judges. The judges can adjudicate the case. And maybe that even includes the master being put to death. You're not allowed to treat your slaves violently in the Torah conception. However, if he lingers for a couple of days before dying, then it's a sign you didn't beat him too much. It was a fair beating, okay? And therefore, it's not adjudicated. The judges don't have to judge the case, okay? Because there's no reason, okay? There's no incentive for you to intentionally beat your slave to death, okay? You beat him, okay? Maybe he had a heart attack. Maybe he was, something was wrong with him physically, and he died. You're not going to intentionally beat your slave to death, because that's your loss of money. That's what's being said here, okay? What is not being said is, I've heard so many secular scholars, including one named Joel Bodden, I remember him talking about these verses, saying that slaves were treated or that slaves were treated basically as chattel, because you can beat them to death whenever you want. Okay, there was if they were beaten to death, then you were not charged with murder. Okay, so there was a different set of laws for the slave as there were for the freeborn. Okay. That is a bunch of baloney. That's a bunch of baloney. He's taking it completely out of context. That's not what the Torah is saying at all. The Torah is saying you're allowed to beat your slave. If you overdo it, then, well, first of all, when you beat your slave, you have no incentive to overdo it, because if you lose your slave, you've lost your money. But if you do beat your slave too harshly, then you can be brought before the judges, and you can be adjudicated, and that case can be adjudicated, and whatever the judges decide, maybe even the death penalty, then that's what is put on you. Okay, I hope that makes more sense now. Okay. Exactly. Avenged could be fined. Maybe it means lashes. Maybe it means being put to death. That's for the judges to decide. What this means, where it says nakom yanakem, so literally it means it shall certainly be avenged. Okay. I think what that means, my understanding of what it means, is that the case is brought to the judges. The judges hear the circumstances of the case, and these upstanding, God-fearing, wise, and men who hate corruption hear the case and then adjudicate based on the specific circumstances. And that's always the case. Remember, you cannot adjudicate based on the written Torah. That's why we have judges. That's why the head of Israel was the judge. Moshe was the judge. Joshua was the judge. All of the book of Judges, these were judges. And eventually, the nation of Israel clamored for a king. So now the king became the head judge, but that king was not a prophet. Okay? Okay. We can get a little commentary on that. Okay, so this is Robert Alter on that. The Hebrew says he in each instance because the masculine form has grammatical precedence referring to him or her. Fair enough. Since both the female and the male slave are mentioned as possible objects of violence, the translation, in order to avoid the awkward he or she, okay, but that's irrelevant to what we want to do. Okay, the sad implication of this stipulation is that vigorous beating of slaves, male and female alike, was assumed to be an acceptable practice. I disagree. If the slave lasted a couple of days and then died, the interference would be that the master had not intended the death, but had merely overdone the beating. Exactly. If a slave died on the spot, this would be evidence the master had meant to kill him, or at least was guilty of involuntary manslaughter. I disagree with that. Okay. In both cases, In the first case, it means the master overdid it, okay? And in the second case, it means the master didn't overdo it, but the slave died anyway. For there is money that is, it would be counter to the master's own interest to take the life of a slave after having purchased him to perform service. So the presumption is that unless the slave dies during the beating, there was no clear intention on the part of the master to kill him, right? Pretty much exactly what we were saying. Okay. And nobody intends that a slave should be treated harshly, not in Israel. And we see there are many laws regarding slaves, such as if a slave runs away, you're not allowed to return him to his master. Okay? If a slave, let's see, Torah, if a slave runs away, let's look at this. Where is it? Turn to his master. Okay. Deuteronomy 23:16. Let's look at that for a second. Okay. לא תזכיר עבד אל אדוניו אשר נצל אליך מעם אדוניו. You shall not return, or what's the better word for that? Skir, how they say in modern English? Oh, there's a specific word. I can't think of it. Skir, not confiscate. I can't remember. Turn in, we'll go with. Hey, you shall not return a slave to his master, who sought refuge with you, from his master. 16. He shall dwell with you in your midst, in a place that he shall choose, in a place that he shall choose, in one of your gates, meaning in one of your cities or one of your settlements, betovlo, in a place that's good for him, lo to'nenu, and you shall not take advantage of him. You shall not oppress him. Okay? So I guess there are questions to ask here. Is this only a Hebrew slave? Is this a non-Hebrew slave owned by an Israelite? Is this some slave that just happened to run into Israel, fleeing from his master from Moab or Edom or whatever? I don't know. We can ask those questions when and if we get to Deuteronomy 23, but we see that a slave that runs away from his master, you can and says and seeks refuge with you, you are not allowed to return that slave. Okay, so don't go telling me that the Torah allows harsh treatment of slaves. Okay, there's another example in Numbers 30, I believe it is, if my memory serves me correct. Maybe it's 31. No, it's 29. No, 28. Okay, I know how to find it. If I can't find, I know where to find it. 1 second. Second. It's not there. 1 second, please. See. Exodus 21, 22. It's Exodus 21. Okay. We'll get to it then. Okay. Verse 22. Let's go on to the next. So these are, again, as I've quoted this guy Joel Bodden. He's a very, very brilliant, but secular Torah scholar, professor at the Yale Divinity School. He has a lot of stuff online. He has an entire series on the Old Testament. I disagree with him as much as I agree with him, but he definitely is a brilliant man with a very deep, albeit secular, understanding of the Torah. And he always says, so someone asked him, are the laws of the Torah illustrative? And he says, at best illustrative. And he means the written Torah. In other words, these laws are meant to illuminate how to think. They're meant to teach us how to think. Yes, they're meant to be guidelines, let's put it that way. They're not meant to be exhaustive. They can't be exhaustive, right? It's the judges, it's the day-to-day running of the nation of Israel that is with judges, with righteous judges, that is meant to internalize these ideas and then use them to run the nation and adjudicate cases on a day-to-day basis. Again, in contrast to what the rabbis would say, that they have their quote-unquote oral law. Okay, verse 22. V'chi yinasu anashim ve'nagfu isha hara ve'yatz'u yiladeha ve'lo yi'eh ason. Okay, so if men should strive, so this is a famous verse, and it's also never really 100% clear what's going on here, but let's try our best to understand it. So if two men should strive together, meaning should fight, ve'nagfu isha, and they strike or they beat, how they translate here, hurt a woman, a pregnant woman, and her children come out. But there is not a tragedy. Well, okay, this is a lot to unpack there. So the usual understanding of this verse is that two men are fighting, and by mistake they hit a pregnant woman, and her that causes her to prematurely give birth to a child, but the child lives. Okay, that's the usual understanding, although it's definitely not clear. The rest of the verse. Anosh ye anesh kasher yashit alav ba'al isha unatan b'flinim. So he shall be punished, the person who struck the pregnant woman, as the husband of this woman requests, Yashit alav, requests from this man, and approved by the judges. So again, I'm giving what's the usual. There's a lot of room for discussion as to what this actually means, but the usual interpretation, the usual understanding is that then the husband requests a certain amount of money that he believes is fair for what this fighting man did to his pregnant wife. And if it's approved by the judges, then that's his monetary compensation for the situation. Okay? Wa'im ason yi'eh, u'natat nefesh tachat nafesh. And if a tragedy occurs, and this is usually understood as if the child dies, in other words, this causes a miscarriage and the child dies, and then you shall give a life for a life. Okay, so does this mean that the man is put to death? No, it doesn't. The phrase, a life for a life, a tooth for a tooth, an eye for an eye, is misunderstood. What this means is he should be put to death. And I have an entire article on this. This article that I brought up here, it's called An Eye for an Eye. You're welcome to read this article. I'll post the link. Okay? So you can check out that link. And I explain it in detail, but I do want to kind of move forward here. What this means is that person should be put to death, but because he did not intend to kill the baby, right? Then he's not put to death. It means he's worthy of death, but he gets to pay it off with monetary compensation. Ayin tachat ayin, shin tachat shin, yad tachat yad, eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a hand for a hand, a regel tachat regel, a leg for a leg, or a foot for a foot, kviya tachat kviya, a burn for a burn, petza tachat petza, an injury for an injury, chabura tachat chabura, and a bruise for a bruise. So this would seem that this means that the Torah is saying if you put someone's eye out, then your eye is put out. Okay? Again, I don't think it's what it's saying there. It means that's what should happen. You deserve to have your eye put out, but you can pay it off. And I explain it in detail in this article. I'm not going to get into it now because I want to move ahead. וכי כאיש את עין עבדו או את עין אמתו ושיחתה לחופשי ישכנו תחת עינו. So we say here, so now we're talking about a non-slave, ayin tachat ayin. If you put another person's eye out, then you deserve to have your eye put out, but you can pay it off. If you put your slave's eye out, then your eye is not put out. The slave is recompensed. How is he recompensed? He's set free. Okay? Again, if you listen to a person like Joe Biden, he would say this is the law for a free man, this is the law for a slave. That for a free man, there's punishment, that your eye should be put out, but for a slave, he's just set free. That's not the case at all. Okay? In both cases, it's speaking about monetary compensation. But in the case of the slave, the monetary compensation is he's set free. His servitude is ended. And the same again. So here we have eye, tooth, eye, tooth. So it's basically kind of a reiteration of here, eye for an eye, tooth for tooth. Here we have, if you put your slave's eye out, or you put his tooth out, your slave or your maidservant, your male or female slave, then that slave is set free. Okay. It doesn't mean abortion. It has nothing to do with abortion, in my opinion. It means, again, a miscarriage. It's talking about a miscarriage. First case is when the miscarried baby lives. Second case is when the miscarried baby dies. Okay, let's move on. And I think I'm going to, after this, just read through to the end of our parsha. I know I always say I'm going to do that and I get sidetracked, but I really think that's what I'm going to do. In fact, I'm going to start doing that right now. Let's try to get through because we want to go through the end of 24. So we're going to go into super express mode. I have regular mode, express mode, which I never follow, and super express mode, which usually I follow. So I'll try my best. I'm not going to translate into English. I'm just going to read through to the end of our parsha, and then we're going to end the study. So follow along in your English translation, or if you know the original Hebrew, better yet, or whatever your favorite language is, maybe Serbian friend, although he's not here today. You know, or if you're trying to learn, I don't know, ancient Greek, follow along in ancient Greek, whatever floats your boat. Verse 28, shor et ish or et isha wamet. Sakol yisakel hashor velo yachel et basro ba'al hashor naki. Verse 29, mi'im shor nagah hu mitmol shilshom. Same phrase that we saw about a premeditated murder. If the person hated the other person yesterday and the day before, so if, well, I can't even get into it, but this proves the I wish I had time. I'm just going to go ahead. It's basically, if your animal kills someone else and you had no idea it was a violent animal, then nothing happens to you, okay? If you knew it was a violent animal because it did so before, and it goes and kills another person, then you're held responsible. You deserve to be put to death. But you're not put to death because it's not premeditated murder, okay? But you deserve to be put to death, but you can pay your way out. That's what it says in verse 31. O ben yigach, o bat yigach, mishpat hazeh ye'aseh lo. I'm sorry, in verse 30. Im kofer yishat alav v'natan pidyon nafsho, kechol asher yishat alav, o ben yigach, o bat yigach, mishpat hazeh ye'aseh lo. So basically, you should be put to death because you did not take care of your violent animal. Like, let's say you have a pit bull. Your pit bull mauls the neighbor to death. You should be put to death because you didn't, take care of your pit bull, but you're not put to death because even though you were horribly negligent, you did not intend for your pit bull to murder the neighbor, to maul the neighbor to death. 32. Im eved yigach hashor or ama kesef 30 shekalim iten adonav hashor yisakel. That's for the slave. Verse 33. וכי יפתח איש בור, או כי יכרה איש בור ולא יחסנו ונפל שם שור או חמור, בעל הבור ישלם כסף, ישיב לבעלה והמת יהיה לו. So you broke it, you bought it. Verse 35, וכי יגוב שור, איש את שור רעהו המת, מכרו את השור החי וחצו את כספו וגם את המת יחצון. Okay? Verse 36, או נדע כי שור נגחו מתמול שלשום, same phrase again, ולא ישמרנו בעלהו, שלם ישלם שור תחת שור והמת יהיה לו. Verse 22, notice that animals, here it said shor chamor, a cat, a bull, I think it translates ox, I'm sorry, as an ox or a donkey. Here we have an ox or a lamb. So animals are used as placeholders, are used as examples of the law, right? So it could be another type of animal, or it could be some similar case that falls into this concept. Verse 1, וכי יגנוב איש שור עושה, ותבחו או מחרו, 5 בקר ישלם תחת השור, ו4 צאן תחת עשה. אם במחתרת ימצא הגנב, ויבקע או מת, אין לו דמים. So, at night, if you come across a robber at night and you kill him, you are free to go. ואם זרחה השמש עליו, דמים לו. שלם ישלם אם אין לו ונמכר בגנבתו. So much to unpack there, but I wish I just don't have the time. So if it happens during the day, then you're responsible. You have to pay for that robber's death. If you don't have the money to pay, then you are sold into indentured servitude. And this here verse shows that indentured servitude is a result of not having enough money to pay your debts. And we're clearly not talking about a case where the person being robbed thinks his life is in danger. Obviously, any common sense dictates the fact that if you think your life is in danger, then you're allowed to kill a person day or night. Okay? I think this means basically, so machteret, they usually translate it in darkness or at night. Okay. No, the translation here is sneaking in or breaking in. Okay, I want to move ahead. Im himase timase biado הגניבה מישור עד חמור עד שא חיים שניים ישלם. חיים שניים ישלם. Verse 5. כי יבער איש שדה או כרם או חרם ושילח את בעירו וביער בשדה אחר מיטב שדה ומיטב כרמו ישלם. So if a fire spreads to your neighbor, then you have to give him the best of your fields. וכי תצא איש מצא קוצים ונאכל גדיש או הקמה או השדה, שלם ישלם המבעיר את הבעירה. So if you light a fire, and I live right now in a rural area, and you will see farmers, they will light parts of their field on fire all the time. So this is very common in agricultural areas. Verse 7, וכי ייתן איש אל רעהו כסף או חינים לשמור וגונב מבית האיש, אם ימצא הגנב ישלם שניים. ואם לא ימצא הגנב, ונקרב בעל הבית אל האלוהים, אם לא שלח ידו במלאכת רעהו. And this is a case of a word. So we're speaking about objects, but this says the work of his fellow man, but it means the objects he was able to buy through his labor. And I forgot what the grammatical term for this is, but this is I won't say common, but it occurs often enough in the Tanakh, where a word represents the results of that word or the outcome of that word. Again, if we had more time, I'd get into it in more detail. Okay. Al kol devar pesha, al shor, al hamor, al seh, al shalma, al kol veda asher yomar ki hu zeh ad Elohim yavod devar shnehem asher yarish un Elohim yishalem shnayim le're'ehu. Verse 10. כי ייתן איש אל רעהו חמור או שור עושה וכל בהמה לשמור ומת או נשבר או נשבע אין רואה. So if something happens to an animal that you give another person to take care of, then well, that's what it says. Verse 11, שועה יהוה תהיה בין שניהם אם לא שלח ידו במלאכת רעהו. So you have to swear that you didn't do anything to your fellow man's animal. לקח בעלה ולא ישלם. Verse 12, אם בנוב יגנב עמו ישלם לבעלה, אם טרוף יטרף יביאהו עד הטרפה לא ישלם. So much to unpack there, but again, I want to just move on. וכי ישאל איש מעם רעהו ונשבר או מת בעלה, אין עמו שלם ישלם, אם בעלה עמו לא ישלם, אם שכיר הוא בא בשכרו. And I think we'll just go to the end of, I'm getting tired. I think we're going to go to the end of 22 and stop there. We've been going at it for 3.5 hours. Okay. Verse 16, 17. אחי, יפתה איש בתולה אשר לא הרסה, I'm sorry, לא או רסה, שרב עמה, מהור ימהרנו לו לאישה. אם ימען אביה, לתיתה לו כסף ישקול, כמוהר הבתולה. So if you seduce a virgin who is not engaged, who is not betrothed to another man, because if that virgin is betrothed to another man, it's like she's married, and if you have relations with such a woman, you're put to death, then you have to pay the bride price. You have to pay the bride price. And if her father doesn't want it, im ma'en aviha letitalo, and if the father nevertheless doesn't want to give his daughter to this man, kesef yishkol k'mohar betula. Then the bride price shall be paid anyway. That's up for interpretation, but we'll leave it at that. Machsheva lo tichayeh, shall not allow a witch, a wizardess, to survive, to live. And I have a friend who is, yes, Whitey boy. I have a friend who was a very clever friend who hated Yitzhak Rabin's wife, Leah Rabin. He always used to call her a witch. And he said when she died, he said that finally she kept one mitzvah in the Torah, which is machshefa lo tichiyeh. You shall not suffer a witch to live. She finally kept the mitzvah in the Torah when she died. Okay, anyway. Anyone who has sexual relations with an animal is put to death. Now, I had an interesting discussion. We met 3 witches so far. How about that? So this is speaking about literally vaginal sex with an animal. Okay, now I don't want to get too graphic, so I'm not even going to go there. If it's less than vaginal sex, if it's something else, it is disgusting, it's sick, but it's not punishable by death. You can maybe take it to the judges and they can adjudicate a punishment, but it's not death. You'd have to have vaginal sex with the animal. Zoveach Elohim Yahrem Birti Liyahweh Levado. So only sacrifice to Yahweh. וגר לא תונה ולא תרחצנו, כי גרים הייתם בארץ מצרים. Do not oppress the stranger, because you are a stranger in a strange land. כל אלמנה ויתום לא תענון. Do not oppress the widow and the orphan. אם ענה תענה אותו, כי אם יצעק אליי שמוע ישמע צעקתו, וחרה פי והרגתי אתכם בחרב והיו נשיכם אלמנות ובניכם יתומים. So if you oppress the widow or the orphan, and that widow or orphan cries out to me, I'll kill you, and then your wife will be a widow and your children will be orphans. I love it. I love it. It's such a beautiful warning, right? What you do, what goes around comes around. Karma. ואם כסף תלווה את עמי, את עני עמך לא תהיה לו כנושה, לא תשימון עליו נשך. So if you lend money to the poor, then, don't press him too much. Give him reasonable, fair terms, and give him a lot of mercy to pay it back. אם הבול תחבול שלמת רעך עד בוא השמש תשיבנו לו. If you take his clothing as collateral for the loan, then you have to give it back to him at night. He ksuto levada hi simlato leoro b'ma yishkav v'haya yitzak alai v'shamati ki hanun ani. This is the only, I'm paraphrasing here, it's the only thing he has to keep himself warm at night. And if he cries out to me, I will hear, because I am a kind God. Elohim lo tkalel. So this is one of the reasons the rabbis say that Elohim here means judges, because it says God. You shall not curse God, and you shall not curse a prince. You shall not curse a leader among your people. So the rabbis might say, and possibly they're correct, although I don't think so, that because this is a human, this is a prince or a ruler, that this would only make sense if this is another human leader and this is therefore a judge. It's possible that this may mean the judge that sits in the place where God dwells. I don't know. It's a tough one. Remember before we saw that Robert Alter called that a crux. So BDB says, rulers, judges, either as divine representatives at sacred places or reflecting divine majesty and power. Elohim. Could be. Okay. Le'atcha. ודמעך. לא. תאחר בכור בניך תיתן לי. So that's basically the first fruits, or the tithes, not the tithes, but the best offerings that you have to bring to God. כי תעשה לשורך לצאנך 7 ימים תהיה עם אמו. הנה תיתנו לי. So if you're going to bring if you're going to bring one of your animals as a sacrifice or as an offering, then you can't do it until the 8th day. For 7 days, that animal is allowed to be with his mother. In other words, a newborn. Be holy, and any animal that's been ripped apart, in other words, like a roadkill, basically, cast it off, throw it to the dogs, don't eat it. And a lot of kashrut, what we call kashrut, has to do with not eating disgusting things. All right. Okie doke. We've been going at it for almost 4 hours. I'm going to end it here. Can't believe it, Melech. Is this the first time? I don't know what you're talking about. Melech met 3 witches so far. Is what the first time? I don't understand what you're saying, Yoshi Ben. Okay. Finishing. I don't understand. No, we didn't finish. We did not finish the parsha. We're supposed to go to the end of 24, but that's it. I'm done. Any questions, any comments before we end it? Anybody? Okay. Let's end it then. Let me remind you of a couple of things. Check out the newspaper that I published for many years and I've trying to revive. That's Your Jerusalem. Again, I'll post the link. Thank you, Whitey Boy. So that's Your Jerusalem. Check it out. Also, a good friend of mine and fellow Karaite who likes to remain somewhat anonymous has started a TikTok channel where I do questions and answers. So I should probably find the link for that. Hold on a second. Let me see if I can grab it. One second. Just give me 1 second. Not next time. Yeah, next time. Okay. You think we will see the land vomit out the inhabitants? I don't think so. I think that Israel is going to face some very, very tough times in the coming years. I think that it's possible that many more people will die than already died on October 7th, because I don't think we're ready to repent yet. It's possible we'll be reduced to a smaller remnant, but my personal opinion is I think this is the ingathering, and I don't think that Israel is going to be thrown out of the land again. I don't think so. I hope not. It's possible. That's my personal opinion. Okay. So that's it, people. We're done. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining the World Alliance of Qara'im. We'll go out with a little bit of music. Let me try some different songs than the ones we've usually been doing. Let's see what we got here. And thank you all for joining me. And Be'esarat Yahweh, we will do it again next week. Let's get some music going here. I'm playing that a lot lately. Oh, it's an oldie but a goodie.
אוויר הרים צלול כיין, וריח אורנים, נישא ברוח הערביים, עם כל פעמונים. ובתרדמת אילן באבן, שבויה בחלומה, העיר אשר בדד יושבת, ובליבה חומה. ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור. ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור. איכה יבשו בורות המים, כיכר השוק ריקה, ואין פוקדת הר הבית בעיר העתיקה. ובמערות אשר בסלע, והלילות רוחות, ואין יורד אל ים המלח בדרך יריחו. ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור. ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור. אך בבואי היום לשיר לך ולך לקשור כתרים, קטונתי מצעיר בנייך ומאחרון המשוררים. כשמך צורבת השפתיים, כי נשיקת זרב, אם אשכחך ירושלים אשר כולה זהב. ירושלים